Paul, can we get a sound check?
Okay, sorry about that, everybody. Okay. That's why I'm done with these meetings, Paul. I lost the link.
Well,
So
we've got
he's the only one here.
6
He doesn't
of the
need
planning
to-
commissioners.
he's gonna talk.
Corey Weiss, I haven't seen her enter yet. But otherwise, everybody's on the list.
Meeting of the City of Falls Church Planning Commission to order. And I think, is it Mr. Garris? Will you please call the roll?
Chair Krasner,
I'm here.
Stevens, Ms. Stevens, Ms. Teets,
Here.
Mr. Puentes,
Here.
Ms. Weiss, Ms. Comott,
Here. Miss Weiss has internet issues. She should be here momentarily.
oh, I see her. I thought I saw her icon. Mr. Hyra,
Okay, good. So we have a critical mass. And I guess for what I hope is the last time, I will read the requisite electronic meeting notice. The meeting for which this agenda has been posted will be held pursuant to and in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708.2, and state and local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operation during the COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of the Planning Commission will be present at this meeting through electronic means, and all members of the public are welcome to view the meeting at www.fallschurchva.gov/PC and on Falls Church City Television, which you can view on Cox Channel 11, RCN Channel 2, and Verizon Channel 35. Public comments are accepted virtually. Anyone who signed up to speak, do so via the meeting video platform. In order to speak on a public hearing item or provide general public comment, you would have needed to complete a speaker form at our website, www.fallschurchva.gov/public comment before noon on the day of the meeting. Following that, you would have received emailed instructions to join the virtual Planning Commission meeting. So hopefully that's occurred. Written public comments are accepted in real time at our email address, which is monitored during the meeting. You can email us at plan, PLAN, at fallschurchva.gov until the end of the meeting. And if you do so, any comments will be sent to us and summarized here at the meeting. Okay. So with that, we will move on down the agenda, which is item number 3, which is adoption of the agenda. Mr. Stoddard and I did review the agenda, and I think tonight we have both an action item, a public hearing, and a work session, a couple of work sessions, in addition to our other regular scheduled items. So it seemed to make sense to me, the way it's ordered. So if there's no comments or recommended changes to that, I would look for a motion to adopt our agenda as published. Anybody?
Mr. Chair, the only thing I might say is that I know there are a number of folks who have signed up tonight to speak to an item that is on your agenda as a work session item. Mm-hmm. So I guess my suggestion, following rules of procedure, just on the mechanics of that, would be to accept those receipts during item 5, receipt of petitions for it's
Sure.
labeled for items not on the agenda. Otherwise, you could, I suppose, suspend your rules and allow comment during the work session. I'll
No,
leave that to you.
That's fine. No, I think we're not going to suspend any rules. We're there. It's a work session item tonight. It's not a public hearing. So if anyone is wishing to speak to an item that's a work session item, then I would recommend that you do so in a few minutes when we call for receipt of petitions, which is essentially a time for anyone to speak about anything. Because again, during work sessions, we don't take verbal comment. We have received all the written comment that was received, but it's not until the public hearing that we take formal verbal testimony. So anyhow, we still need that. So that's just the announcement there. Do we have any? We still need the motion to adopt the agenda as published. If everyone's okay with that.
Mr. Chair, I move we adopt the agenda as published.
Thank you, Commissioner Comont. Do we have a second?
Second, Tim Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Any discussion? If not, then I guess we'll do a roll call vote.
Mr. Krasner,
Yes?
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Teets,
Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Ms. Weiss, and Ms. Comont,
Yes.
Mr. Hyra.
Yes.
Okay. Great. And Ms. Weiss hopefully is working out her, I didn't hear Ms. Weiss, so hopefully she's working out her connection and we'll get her back shortly. All right. So the agenda is adopted as printed. We have no speaker series tonight, so we'll skip over number 4. And then that takes us to number 5, receipt of petitions for items not on the agenda. And again, as I just mentioned, this is the time, if anyone is logged in here wishing to speak on anything not on the agenda, or I guess I'll say anything on a work session, which is the West Walsh, Virginia Tech Rushmark purchase and sale agreements, or the T-Zone zoning text amendment. If you're logged on wishing to provide any verbal testimony or comments on that item, this is your time to do that.
Chair Krasner, we have 3 speakers tonight, and I can just call them in order to see some structure to it. The first of which is Fred Thompson. Are you on the call?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
Okay,
Ms.
yeah.
Thompson, I guess, and again, we typically provide 3 minutes. It's been a while since we've had some speakers.
Yeah, that's correct. Typically, it's 3 minutes or 5 minutes for someone who's formally representing a recognized group.
Okay. All right then, Mr. Thompson. Are you speaking on behalf of a group?
I'm speaking on behalf of a task force that I lead at the Broadway condominium.
Well, I don't know.
Not
if
an
that's
officially recognized group, I suspect.
if you were speaking on behalf of the condominium association, I think we'd give you 5 minutes, but I think otherwise we'll stick with 3. So,
Well, I am appointed by the condominium association for that role.
well, if you think you need the full 5 minutes, I suppose we'll let you go for it. But
I don't.
okay. Then have at it.
Okay. I tried to turn my camera on. That doesn't work, but I will go through basically elaborating on some points that I sent to the Planning Commission by email a few days ago. The first one was to request that the Planning Commission have access to all of the information that we have shared with the City Council, and I've made a number of submissions on this T-zone issue to the Council, and I thank Paul Stoddard and the staff of the Planning Division for having done that. I see where that has been provided. The second was to mention that in the report and draft ordinance, there's a picture which shows what a 50-foot high, 80% coverage building looks like. And I have proposed to the Planning Commission that you ask the city to expand that picture and that you add the Broadway, a 54-foot building, which would be adjacent to one of these zones at 54 feet and our lot coverage, and show how those two look together. Because I think the point that should be made is that essentially this new T-zone strategy eliminates transition. And I think that that picture is worth 1,000 words, will be worth 1,000 words, and basically shows there is virtually no transition between the existing building and the maximum building that could be built on adjoining sites. The third thing really is that I think that although the city council has given an agenda or a draft agenda to the planning commission, I think the planning commission should review all the relevant documents, all the relevant testimony submissions by ourselves and others, and really decide what their approach should be. And I know we're having trouble in July having a critical mass of people. I suspect that even the planning commission and the council itself might deal with that as well. Lots of people are trying to do postponed vacations. I think it would be a good time for the commission to use its expertise and communicate with the city council on what the best strategies are, how best to meet its objectives, and whether this ordinance should be amended or changed before it is actually discussed with the public, because I think there's great opportunity for improvement here. Once there is an agreement to move forward and the schedule is set, I would urge that the maximum amount of publicity take place in the community, that you inform all local people who are near or attached to these or adjacent to these units, which is many, many people, that you put signage up and that you inform, in the case of the Broadway, all 81 landowners who are property tax paying members of the city, and not just our building, but an individual landowner here. And that you try to hold hearings that can get wide attendance throughout the city, including not just trying to do them in the heat of the summer, but also maybe doing one in the fall as well, and make recommendations to the city on changes that they might want to make, or the city council that they might want to make in the language that they are proceeding with. And then I wanted to identify one other issue that, although not in the ordinance per se, I think is important, which is that almost all of the protections that are currently built into the zoning ordinances are for residential homes. There are noise controls, there are traffic controls, there are light controls of a parking lot and requirements for screening. All of those things, they all apply only to residential homes. And we are a residence that is adjacent to a T-zone. And I think we have many of the concerns that any other private homeowner in the city would have in terms of, if you built a garage next to us, we'd want to be screened from the light. But it does not appear that any of those requirements, restrictions, or controls would apply in our case. So it's something I think the Planning Commission should look at. We're building more apartments, more condos in the city. We're bringing in more residents who are not in private homes. I think that the Planning Commission should look at how it protects all of our residents, not just those in private homes that are in residential districts, but also those of us who front on transition zones. So that's essentially the points that I wish to make.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I should ask you at the beginning, I know you stated your name. Just for the record, can you just state your address?
Yes, it's 502 West Broad Street, Unit 509, Falls Church, Virginia.
Thank you very much. And again, obviously, this is on for work session, so I would encourage you and anyone else who's interested to certainly stay logged on to listen into the work session. And I'll just say at this outset, there's certainly my intention as chair of the Planning Commission to have a robust public process as far as any updates to the zoning ordinance in respect to the T-zones, and that's something we'll talk about during the work session. Okay, Mr. Garris, who is our next speaker?
Brian and or Patricia Aberano.
Yes, thank you very much. This is Brian Aberano. Our address is 502 West Broad Street, apartment 316 in Falls Church. We're one of the residents at the Broadway condominium. And in fact, we're in a unit which directly faces the transition zone that is between the Broadway and Park Avenue between Lee and Pennsylvania. And so it was only recently that we learned of the potential for this change in that transition district, and of the potential for a very intense development of that district, as Fred Thompson has mentioned, a 50-foot building, possibly 80% coverage, and of importance to us since we're right next to it, only a 10-foot rear setback. And that, if such a building or development was put behind us, would drastically affect the air and light coming into our unit, the greenery that's behind our unit. And in some other ways, the Broadway has had drainage problems, which we have talked about with the city. And in fact, this entire area has drainage problems, and intense development of the district behind us would, I suspect, strain the drainage facilities even further. There's also beginnings of parking problems. The Broadway was developed quite a long time ago and doesn't have any guest parking. So all of our guests have to park on the streets around the Broadway. Certainly if the area behind us was intensely developed, that would very well create other parking problems, as well as the growing traffic problem that's around our area. And as Fred said, really the Broadway and our area, particularly as it goes towards Park Avenue, is strictly residential. It's not really a business district in that sense. I think we don't know very much about the legislation as it affects how these developments would be improved, but it seems like it provides for a speedier and more truncated version for approval of some of these more drastic developments, and that would concern us also. We know that a lot of the impetus for this legislation appears to be because of the 10% affordable housing that would be put into the bill. But I would simply note that even for like residential townhouse districts or residential multifamily districts, they provide for a lot less coverage of the lot, greater like 40 feet, rear setbacks, things of that nature. And so I think all of that needs to be taken into account. We hope that there will be time so that this matter can be studied and that the public will hear about it and be allowed to participate, because it is important, because step by step, I've seen other communities that have undertaken changes to further develop, and I've seen them get quite out of hand, and I've seen communities put in developments that are not good, and once you do it, it's kind of permanent. It's very hard to go back. So I think it's something that should be dealt with carefully. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Garris, who's our next speaker?
Our last speaker is Deborah Doctor.
Oops. Hi, I'm Deborah Doctor. I live at 502 West Broad Street, Unit 222. I also face the transitional zone that's on Park Avenue. I have 2 points I'd like to make. One is reiterating what both gentlemen have just said, that a 50-foot building behind our 54-foot building and then across the street, single-family homes, is not a transition. So that's my first concern. The second concern is this 80% coverage. And we met with the mayor and some council members where the 80% came from, since currently it's 40%. I have not gotten a concrete answer. So I went and looked on Fairfax County and Arlington County today, their zoning, and Fairfax County on their transitional housing for smaller areas. They require, their maximum height is 35 feet. The rear setback is 25 feet. And their floor area ratio is 0.25 in Arlington County. And a lot of these people are addressing this with not huge condos, but multiplexes. In Arlington County, they have areas from 8 to 12,000 feet where they suggest putting 3 townhouses or 4 multiplexes, or 12,000 to 15,000 feet where they suggest 6 multiplexes or 8 multiplexes. They require a tree canopy of 20 to 50%. The maximum height, again, is 35 feet or 3.5 stories. Their maximum lot coverage is 40%, And if there's a detached garage in the back, it's 45%. So I would like to, since we abut those counties and we're somewhat, even though we're smaller, we're somewhat similar in types of population, I'd like to know how we got to the 80%. I have no problem with the affordable housing that we would put in these zones, but I also question why these big developments that are being built, if we're truly interested in the missing middle, why is there not a higher percentage in like the Founders Row or the one going up at Washington and Broad? That would help the missing middle if we made that percentage 20 or 25%, because our little lot here, the transitional lot behind us, isn't going to hold a whole lot of units. And, 10 or 15% of that is not much. Whereas if you have a 200 or 300 room condo, 20 or 25% would certainly accommodate a lot of additional housing. So I would really like you to consider this 80% and that it is not a good way to go, that the surrounding counties are not using that. It also will get rid of a lot of the green space that we enjoy here in Falls Church, as well as cause stormwater issues. So that's what I have to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Garris, anyone else? You indicated that was our last speaker. Anybody else?
Nope, you're correct.
Okay, great. All right, thank you very much. And again, I'd encourage anyone of our speakers to stay logged on and listen to the discussion, the staff presentation later in the meeting. Also, meeting will be recorded. You'll be able to watch it afterwards if you don't want to stay with us in real time. Okay, so moving right along. The next item is, we're up to 6, our action items, and our first action item, which I should read since it's a public hearing. Bear with me here. About the staff report. Okay, so this is a public hearing. The action is a resolution to grant special exception site plan approval for a mixed-use building with a building height up to 15 stories on approximately 0.76 acres of land for the proposed senior housing building of the West Falls Economic Development Project located at 7124 Leesburg Pike. It's a portion of real property code number 51-221-010 on application by TC Mid-Atlantic Development 5 Inc. And with that, I see the applicant and the applicant team is, I think they're logged on. I think I saw some folks on their behalf. Mr. Stoddard, I guess we'll start out with a staff report.
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the commission. So there is a staff report on this item. As you said, this is the request tonight is for the Planning Commission to make an action tonight, and this is your recommendation, your formal recommendation back to council on the special exception site plan SCSP application for the West Falls Senior Housing Building. Just as a reminder to the group, this is one component of the larger Phase 1 development, which does have a special exception entitlement approval, which does set the basics for the entirety of Phase 1, including this building in terms of the building height, the number of uses, the setback, the landscaping, all those things were set at the SEE, the special exception entitlement, and this SESP is intended to work out the details of that application. The recommendation from staff is to make a positive recommendation back to council, although you can see we did have some suggested recommendations if we're able to float back up to the title block. There we go. So we did have a couple of bullet pointed recommendations that we had in the motion language at the bottom there. So not in the whereas clauses, but Cameron, if you're able to roll down just a couple paragraphs. There we go. We did have a couple recommendations that we thought were still deserving of attention, but I'll turn it over for a fuller report to our case planner on this one, Ms. Emily Bazemore.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm just going to take a few minutes to walk you guys through the staff report before turning it over to the applicant team for a more comprehensive PowerPoint presentation. So tonight, the Planning Commission is requested to hold a public hearing on the first submission and supplemental revised submissions of the West Falls Special Exception Site Plan Senior Housing Application on file by TC Mid-Atlantic Development. This application occurs at 0.76 acres of land within the West Falls Economic Development Project. Following this public hearing, of course, the Planning Commission is requested to make a formal recommendation to Council. This SESP application is a follow-up application, as noted by Paul earlier, to the special exception entitlement that Council approved for the site back on August 9th of 2021. The approval of the SEE established the allowable use, which is senior housing, the building footprint, building height, and other general design elements. The SESP application, of course, addresses final architecture and final site design and engineering. As noted earlier, staff recommends approval of the proposed motion. As concluded in the staff analysis section of the staff report, the SESP is generally consistent with the city's comp plan and substantially achieves the goals of the Special Revitalization District for Education and Economic Development. The SESP is generally consistent with the adopted SEE that was approved back on July 8th of 2019 and the adopted SEE amendment, which is approved back on August 9th of 2021 for the West Falls West Falls Economic Development Project. Moving on to the next page of the staff report, starting on line 57, we have some notes from you guys' work session when you saw the application back on May 4th. Just wanted to highlight that the applicant team has resubmitted a supplemental or interim submission, which included a cover letter, a building program narrative from SRG, which is the operator for senior living, revised parking allocation, revised preliminary TDM plan, and some revised architectural drawings, all in response to Planning Commission's direction. The table starting on line 67 notes some of these things, going from programming to transportation and parking, such as the request for breakdown of residents, employees, and retail use among the parking garage. You can see this on the parking allocation narrative pages 3 and 4. Moving on to a parking layout, which has been updated to show reserved spaces. This can also be found in the interim submission. And then an updated TDM, which includes, of course, our suggestion for showers for employee use to be consistent with the site-wide TDM plan. Again, starting on line 71, you can see some details of those updated materials provided in submission 1.2. Staff received the submission on May 20th, and this the different components are highlighted in this portion of the staff report. Again, this is a building program narrative from SRG, a revised parking allocation, revised TDM, and some architectural drawings that have been updated. We'll save the details there for the applicant team and their presentation. And now we're going to hop quite a few pages in the staff report, so Cameron, bear with me. We are going to go to page, let's see. All right, page 21 of the staff report. All right, yeah, down there at boards and commission review. So since you guys have last seen this application, it has gone through a review by various boards and commissions, the AAB, the EDA, and then also the UFC. So here the staff report kind of captures the back and forth between these different groups and the applicant team. So beginning on line 654, you can see that the Architectural Advisory Board reviewed the SESP application back on May 11th. And they have included a memo just that notes their satisfaction with the applicant team's design choices, as well as their motion that was recommending the project to council. Then following that, we have the EDA. The EDA actually reviewed this back on May 3rd, and some notes from their Q&A portion of the presentation is included in the staff report. Some of their items of interest were building materials. They just wanted some clarity on longevity of the exterior. They wanted some details on the senior resource group, just to learn more about the operator. And then, of course, parking and retail square footage. Just leaning into the retail square footage, it says the applicant team noted that they owe Falls Church Gateway Partners a total of 7,700 square feet of retail. This is included in their interim submission. They met that goal right there. And then finally, they also went to the UFC. And they went to the UFC on May 18th, and the UFC provided a couple of different recommendations to be considered in future iterations of the plans. These were incorporating small trees and vines, incorporating bird collision deterrent design improvements, and then finally installing a pet relief station. And then moving on to the fiscal impact portion of the staff report. I know this came up last time in you guys' discussion, and just wanted to note that we have touched base with the EDO, and that special FIA that was done for the Kensington utilized the real estate tax assessment method that was part of their special exception voluntary concessions. That's something that's no longer being used. And of course, the SEE set the FIA that we're using for this particular application. This was run back at the SEE level, and this isn't something that we would typically go back on for a site plan process. So all is good with the FIA. And then finally moving to timing. Right now we're at you guys on June 1st to hear or to have a public hearing and then a recommendation to council. And the applicant team is scheduled for another submission, their complete submission to mid-June on June 15th, and then they'll go back to council for a work session addressing any boards and commission comments on July 18th, with hopefully a final action and second reading happening on August 8th. Thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over to the applicant team.
Okay, before we do that, is there any questions from commissioners for Ms. Bazemore or for staff before we hear from the applicant? Not seeing any little yellow hands, so okay. Who do we have here on behalf of the applicant?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Matt Allman from Venable. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Great. Thank you so much. And we're very pleased to be here with you this evening. Really enjoyed working with staff on this project, and thank you for that introductory presentation. Again, I'm Matt Allman from Venable LLP in Tysons, Virginia, joined by my colleague, Zach. We also have our owner and developer, the Trammell Crow Company, as well as our design team, Perkins Eastman Architects and Walter L. Phillips Civil Engineers. And so I'll give a very brief overview of the project and then turn it over to the design team to show you in a little more detail the building design. And then we've got everyone here to help answer questions. Next slide. So as a brief recap, and staff touched on much of this, the project really dates its origins back to the summer of 2019, at which point the city entered into a comprehensive development agreement with a master developer entity, regulating the build out of the entire mixed use site. Shortly thereafter, the SEE, or Special Exception Entitlement, was approved. And as staff noted, that's sort of a high-level planning and development approval for the site. It sets the use, it sets out the street network and the open space network. It sets minimums and maximums for building height and density and other criteria. But it didn't include a lot of the very specific granular architectural design or building engineering. That really came online in August of 2021, at which point there was an amendment to that SEE, as well as a Special Exception Site Plan, or SESP, which was approved for most, though not all, of the buildings in the development. That approval did not formally include the senior housing building in terms of the engineered drawings or the architectural drawings. There were merely placeholder images for the senior housing building in the SESP, but there was a recognition, or an approval, I should say, for some additional residential square footage, as you see noted on the slide, up to 260,000 square feet. And that was requested in order to facilitate slightly larger units and make sure that our residents have a more comfortable living space in their individual living areas. And most recently, in January of 2022, we processed an amendment to the comprehensive agreement identifying SRG as one of the approved operators of the building. Next slide, please. So you may have seen a version of this before. I won't go through every single number on the slide. It's really more for your reference. But to shortly walk you through it, on the sort of left of the grid, you can see the approved minimum and maximum development criteria from the SEE as amended through 2021. You see how it sets up a range of acceptable outcomes for the building. In the middle, where it says conceptual approval, you can see the development statistics from August of 2021. And again, that was sort of approved on paper without an actual engineered design to go along with it. So it's a bit of a snapshot in time. And on the far right, you can see where the application statistics stand today per our resubmission package in late May. The building is 15 stories tall. We have delivered on the 7,700 square feet of retail space, and we've increased the unit count ever so slightly to 216, and we are meeting that 260,000 square foot residential cap. So the building itself falls very comfortably within the approved SEE criterion, and we're not asking for any modifications or deviations from that. And as you'll see in the forthcoming slides, I think it's fair to say that the building really honors the spirit of the approved SEE, and the application itself deals mostly with the architecture of the building itself and what's inside the four walls. And that's because the public realm and the street grid, streetscape design, access and circulation, all of those things that were sort of laid out in the SEE have been carried forward, as well as our voluntary concession commitments. Next slide. So here you see a zoomed out view of the entire development with block D1 highlighted in pink. Again, the footprint of the building is very much in line with the SEE approval, and the way it orients towards Commons Drive and the way the circulation around it works is all very consistent, as well as the plan to have parking for our building located in the adjacent shared garage, which is labeled Garage D2 on this slide. Next image, please. This is actually an image which is from the approved SEE graphics, illustrating the open space network. You can kind of see the spine of Commons Drive going up the center of the page, and how the open space network occupies that space. You can see the street grid around the building. And if we could go to the next slide, it'll zoom in a little bit more. Again, this is just a zoomed in version of the approved drawing, just showing the streetscape design. You can see there's a little lay-by or driveway right towards the front entrance of the building, where most of our visitors will be accessing the site. On the rear of the building is the alley, which is where the more service-oriented and loading uses will be functioning, and pull that activity off of the public right-of-way and off the street grid. And then you can see the adjacent garage too. It's not shown here, but there will be a footbridge connection between our building and the D2 garage. You'll see some images of how that will look and where it's located in the coming slides. So I'll turn it over to our design team to show you the rest of the building, but thank you again for your consideration.
Good evening, everybody. This is Gary Steiner of Perkins Eastman. Can you all hear me okay?
We can.
Great, thank you. Can we go to the next slide, please, Ms. Bazemore? Thank you. So the floor plans for this building are largely unchanged from what you've seen in the past, but it's been several weeks since the last time that the commission saw project, so I thought I would give you a quick refresher on what we're doing here and what the layout of the project is and where the uses and functions of the project are. So as Mr. Allman said, we're committed to preserving the ground plane and the public realm as previously approved in the SEE. So when we talk about the ground plane and our first floor, our entry level, which is in the lower left-hand corner of this first slide, you can see the lay-by, which Mr. Allman just talked about, which is in the very center of the elevation facing Commons Boulevard. And so our entrance, the main entrance to the senior living community in the yellow, is also right in the center of the building, which is very symmetrical, very classical, and very formal. The building is organized pretty much in two halves on the ground floor, with the right-hand side facing Magnolia Street or Mustang, or what used to be called Street B, in the blue color or the aqua color as being the retail. And we're showing it at the moment as two subdivided spaces, but it could just be one or it could potentially be three. But in any event, it is 7,700 square feet of retail as we've committed. On the left side of the building, the pink spaces are the primary amenity spaces for the senior living function. We have a living room or parlor space, we have a mail room, and we have a large restaurant space. And then in the back on the alley, the gray space is our kitchen, which is adjacent to the loading dock. And the loading dock and the service corridor network that serves the retail and the senior living is shown in the darker gray or the purple gray color, if you will. So that includes the loading dock, the trash room, the fire control room, the exit corridor that serves the retail and the senior living, and the stairs that serve the retail and the senior living as well. Quickly down to the basement, which is our service area, which is at the upper left corner of this page, you have a variety of utility entrance rooms. So this is where our stormwater management vault is, our incoming electrical service for both retail and senior living, our gas meter, our water meter, both for retail and for senior living, as well as some support spaces, storage and laundry and staff spaces for the senior living function. As we go up the building to the second floor, which is in the upper right-hand corner of this page, we have split the floor pretty much half and half, part of it being senior living amenity spaces and part of it being independent living units in the senior living function. So the pink spaces are multi-purpose and theater and hair salons, spa, and those are amenity spaces. The gray spaces are sales and administrative functions. And then the orange or sort of beige colored spaces are the independent living units on this floor, which there are 8 of them. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner, heading off the page, the vestiges of the bridge that Mr. Allman talked about that goes from our second floor, which is largely an amenity floor, over to the parking garage. And this is the primary means by which residents will get from the garage to the building. Then further up the plan, we have a second floor mezzanine, which is part of the second floor. This comprises of 4 independent living units that may become part of the units that are down below, yielding some open space and some 2-story spaces, but essentially a small mezzanine, less than 1/3 of the square footage of the floor plate below. Let's go to the next slide if we can, Mr. Bazemore. Thank you. So moving further up the building then on the 3rd floor, which is the upper left corner diagram, we have our memory care unit. This is largely unchanged from what you've seen in the past, 22 studio style residences with a wandering path and a circulation zone that takes residents, that's in the yellow, around all sides of the building and then out through the covered courtyard and the secured garden that's part of the outdoor space for memory care. Again, being color consistent, the pinkish colors are the amenity spaces, the dining room, the living room, the activity spaces. The light gray colors are the support spaces. And then the darker gray or purplish gray colors are the shared circulation spaces that run up and down through the building that allow the retail use the ability to have its equipment up on the roof, which we'll talk about a little bit later. On the 4th floor, we have the assisted living amenity floor as well as assisted living units. So again, being consistent, the pink spaces are the amenity spaces for the assisted living units. We have a theater, a living room, a library, a salon, a wellness center, a dining room, an activities room, and a pantry. And then again, the yellow circulation paths, the gray support spaces, which are offices and various support functions for the residents. And then the darker gray, purplish gray color being the shared circulation that's vertically up through the building. On the 5th and 6th floors, which is the upper right-hand diagram, we have our primary grouping of assisted living residences. There are 22 per floor. There are a variety of studio and one-bedroom apartments. And again, color consistency, the yellow being circulation, the gray, dark gray being the vertical circulation that's shared throughout the building, and the white spaces being the vertical circulation that's dedicated solely to senior living. Getting then up to the 7th through 14th floors, which are all identical, those are the independent living apartments. Those are a variety of one-bedroom and two-bedroom apartments, many of them with their own balconies, which will provide outdoor access and the ability to get fresh air and put some potted plants and personalization out there as part of their lifestyle. Can we go to the next page, please? Thank you. Then our 15th floor, our penthouse or amenity level, which is in the upper left, which you can see is almost all pink, is primarily amenity spaces for the independent living residents and the assisted living residents who care to take part in those activities. So on the left side, we have a large social gathering space, which is a sky lounge. We have a games room and an activities room. We have a fitness room and a yoga studio. And then we have locker rooms and a swimming pool and spa. We also have two large outdoor terraces on this level, one opposite the pool area and one opposite the sky lounge area. And as part of these terraces, we have those green spots, if you will, are bioretention planters. So we have two of them on this floor, the 15th floor. We also have two of them down on the 3rd floor memory care terrace. And those are all part of our stormwater management facilities as part of the building. As we go up to the roof plan then, which is the bottom left-hand diagram, the light gray color is our mechanical yard. That is rooftop equipment for the senior living function. And it is all open to the sky with the exception of the white box, which is an enclosed boiler room. On the two sides of the floor plan, we have green roof or vegetated roof. And then you can see a couple of white boxes sort of on the right-hand side between the stair and the vegetated roof. Those are intended to be the HVAC exhaust and makeup air units for the retail space down on the ground floor. And they will be served by a duct shaft immediately adjacent to them running alongside the stair all the way down to the ceiling space of the first floor in order to help ventilate whatever retail spaces or restaurants that may occur in that retail zone. So the stairwell, the duct shaft, the service elevator, and the opposite stairwell, because you always need two means of egress, are all shared spaces that the retail employees make use of, as well as the senior living staff. And then finally, the upper roof plan, which is the high roof, is just some vegetated roof on top of the enclosed spaces that are part of our mechanical penthouse. So the one in the center is above the boiler room. The one on the left-hand side sits above the elevator core and stair core, and the one on the right-hand side sits above the other stair core. So we're making use of as much roof as we can for vegetative roof in order to make sure that we meet our stormwater management requirement. Now, moving on from the plans, next slide, please. We talked about this a little bit the last time we met, and really nothing is different about these slides than what we talked about. What these are really referring to is how our building is consistent with the building that was approved in the SEE. Although the SEE diagram on the left, which was a white box or a sugar cube, had no detail or any specific form to it, other than it was a U-shaped footprint. So we've been consistent with that. Our building is still a U-shaped footprint. It is 15 stories tall. although we've changed some of the proportions to make the building work a little bit better as a residential occupancy. So the main bar that runs along parallel to Commons Boulevard is wider in our building than it was in the original SEE, and that's to allow the residential floors to have adequate depth units on both sides of the corridor. In addition, that bar that runs parallel to Commons Boulevard on the penthouse level sits alone. It doesn't extend over the terraces on the 14th floor roofs, and that's to help break down the massing of the building as you look at it in perspective and to create less of an impact on the skyline. Additionally, we've added a mechanical penthouse on top of that architectural penthouse, which we talked about on the roof plan. And then lastly, we've added balconies as part of the independent living units to provide a way of modulating the exterior and also to provide exterior space for all of the independent living residents, or most of the independent living residents. Next slide, please. Which is really just the same information from the other side of the site. This is looking up Commons Boulevard from across Mustang. And then the next slide, please. So here we start to look at what the building looks like. And originally, when we came to the commission for the amendment to get 260,000 square feet, we were looking at a building that looked like the one on the left, which was a 15-story tall two-tone brick building, primarily red brick with buff colored brick accents. As we continued to study the design of the building and as other parameters in the development came to play, we chose to move to a direction of architectural precast, and that's precast concrete. So there was a question about longevity. This is a concrete material, so it's going to live quite a long time and be easy to maintain. But the point of the matter is that we chose architectural precast partially because we thought it made a more handsome building, and also because it speeds up the installation of the skin of the building and allows us to reduce the overall construction duration of the project, which is a benefit to all of the neighbors and the rest of the development. And we're just not in the construction mode for as many months by going in this direction. So we continue to develop the architectural precast scheme. And as I've said to many other people before, we don't believe that precast really looks very good in a brick color. So that's partially why we moved to a different color palette of a dark gray and a light gray. And then we also started trying to modulate the building a little bit differently and accent the horizontal by using the light gray bands every other floor and the dark gray as an inset plane. So you're also seeing two different planes of material, with the light precast material being forward and the gray precast material being back. If we go to the next slide, you can start to see the building as it continues to develop. And one of the things that we did here in response to the Planning Commission's last meeting was we showed what the footbridge would look like. So you can see it very clearly in the diagram on the left-hand side. It would also look the same from the other side, looking down the length of the alley. But it's also made of the same dark and light gray precast, the same window modulation. So it looks very much part of, and it's integrated to the second floor of our building. And then lastly, in the final development of the architecture, we were able to generate these very detailed renderings, which show the balcony railings that are made of glass, the shadowing that's created by the two planes of the precast, and the actual precast samples, which show a very limestone kind of a finish. So it's a relatively fine texture to it. It's nothing coarse or nothing pebbly per se, like you might think of concrete, but it really feels more like limestone in, again, the light gray and the dark gray colors. And the other thing that this does is it responds very well to the condo building across Commons Boulevard. So in the right-hand image, you can see that building begins to show up on the very right-hand margin of the page. And it is also a dark gray and light gray precast building, but more contrasty than ours. It's a darker gray and a lighter gray. But we thought that because these are the two tallest buildings on the site, and they sort of bookend across Commons Boulevard, that it made sense to pay respect to that building and take cues from it in terms of our choices of materials and colors. Next page, please. I believe that's actually everything that we've got. And at this point, we can start to take questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. I guess I'll open it up to commissioners. If anyone has questions for the applicant. I see, yep, Mr. Stevens, go right ahead.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. First of all, thanks, Ms. Bazemore, for having staff research the issue on the Kensington precedent regarding the valuation. So glad to see that that's not an issue at this point. Two questions I have for the applicant are, first of all, and these are things that I raised at the work session that we had on this a few weeks ago. I asked about whether there would be all electric appliances in the residences. At that point, I think it wasn't sure. I'm just wondering if there was any clarity on that as to the approach that that is selected as far as how the units will be powered.
Yeah, Bill, you want to go?
Yes. So it is. We went back and looked. It's very likely that we will have all electric appliances in all of the units, but we obviously haven't made a selection of the appliances. So I think that's where we're trending, but we haven't gone any farther than that.
Okay, well, I will encourage us in our motion to, since it's a recommendation to City Council, that they continue to have that discussion with you in hopes that that can be achieved, because the glide path for the grid is for it to become all renewable and no carbon over the next 30 years or so, which would mean that buildings that are all electric then would be able to be hitched to that benefit as well. So it's important for the long term. The second issue has to do with the secondary criterion item dealing with energy efficiency, and it's the one that the city asked for a 20% improvement in energy efficiency. And I'm just wondering if there was any clarity on that issue as to whether or not the development team is able to arrive at that result.
Unfortunately, that it's the same situation where, given the stage of the design of the drawings or the stage of design of the project, the lack of really any engineering, we can't commit to a target on energy efficiency.
Okay, well, those are all the questions that I had.
Okay, anyone else? Mr. Hara, your hand just popped up. Go ahead, Mr. Hara.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just trying to see if I can get my camera on, but I don't think I can. Okay. Yeah, again, thank you for the presentation. I think, most of us were on board with the building design last time, but it was nice to have a review. But I would just say that, we did have some specific questions, not necessarily related to the building design, and those weren't addressed in the presentation. So I'm wondering, in the staff report, it was noted that some programming for the building related to the building's social integration with the high school was incorporated into this application. So I'm just wondering if we could get the highlights of that programming.
Yeah, so we offer a robust series of resident programs. It's through a proprietary overall program called Zest that SRG's developed, and they offer a wide variety of different enrichment activities from, physical fitness and wellness. There's a salon in the building that, they offer salon services at. They bring in speakers. They organize volunteering activities. We went and polled just a list of things that they were currently highlighting on their website for that month, and one of them happened to be volunteering at a local school for reading services. So, I think it's part of what we offer our residents to have that sort of programming for them to have active and fulfilling social lives. And this is, a major part of it. And that'll be the program that allows them to integrate, allows the residents of the building to have, a real integration with the surrounding development community.
Well, I guess that's fine. I mean, that sounds like you've done a little bit more due diligence, but I don't think it's gotten to the level that at least I was hoping for, and I don't know how other commissioners feel. But it's sort of, in the presentation, it was mentioned that the architectural design was taking cues and incorporating, the design from the building that's next door, right? And so you guys are thinking about how to have all the buildings fit together. But it's also important to think about all the people that will be in this area. And like I said, you guys know the high school is there. So, having a building management company doing proactive outreach to the high school, I think is really important. It's going to make the whole environment there more socially integrated, workable, and it will reduce potential conflicts that we know are going to come about when you have an older population and a very young population sharing the same space. So again, related to Mr. Stevens' comments and in hearing that you weren't able to address all of his concerns, I would say for my concern, I will hope that we as a commission will continue to elevate this to the city council because they're the ones with the most leverage on this. But I do feel if we're going to have this area be incredibly vibrant and be a place that is welcoming and workable for the diverse populations that we're going to have there, we're going to need every single building and that is in this space to be working together and to not just be thinking about physical integration, but social integration. And it seems that there hasn't been that much thought on this front. And I don't blame you guys. I mean, every time I've talked to developers, they short this part of the deal, but it's hopefully something that we can work with the council to encourage you guys and maybe get as a part of your programming some more deeper thoughts about how to work with the high school and with the younger population that's there. So I'll end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hira. Let's see, Ms. Weiss, your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just gonna pile on a little bit, just to reflect that I don't think that you took our comments in the last session seriously, because we did ask for some reflection on some of these topics, and I just haven't seen it. So, and that's not, I just want to step back and first say that there's a lot to like about the design of this building. So I think that there's a lot that's very positive about this place. And once the construction starts, I'll be sending, the notice to my folks to encourage them to come down here and live here as well. But I really do, I don't think that this was taken seriously, and I don't think that SRG is in the room, so maybe that's why. But the example that you showed, that you just happened to have pulled off the website, was volunteering at a local school in Villahermosa, Arizona. And just a question, how close is the nearest school to the Villahermosa site?
Yeah, I think the crux of this is, our residents are older, right? And some of them, all of the memory care residents and the assisted living residents, are a vulnerable population. And we offer a robust series of social activities for the residents of our building. But what they want to do and what the building programming offers is for our residents and is designed to enrich their experience, and that will, hopefully see them, go out into the community. But I don't quite know how to address this. Like, we can't like require our residents to engage with the high school, right? It's their choice, and it'll be driven by, and our programming will be driven by the desires of our residents. I would ask, I mean, is this a requirement that came up for the apartment building? Like, are we being held to a different standard than the apartments or the condos are in terms of social engagement? And if so, I would say, I don't think that our resident group should be the group that's held to a higher standard. If anything, it should be a lesser one because of their age and vulnerability. So I don't really know how to quite address what you're looking for.
I guess I take issue with that logic. The apartments are just as likely to have high school and middle school students living in them as any other place of residence in the city of Falls Church. Maybe not. I mean, the fiscal impact analysis can tell us the answer there. I think the point that we're trying to drive home here is this is an age-restricted building intentionally, and we're supportive of that. And nobody's talking about requirements here. We're not talking about requirement. We're asking for an intentional acknowledgement of the very real social dynamics that you have a high school and middle school. You've got 6th through 12th grade, a block and a half away. And as the parent of, 2 kids who will be part of a flock of, kids who are streaming down Mustang Alley and up Mustang Alley twice a day, it's just a reality that I think, the needs and wants of the folks who live in this home will be different from the needs and wants of the kids in those schools. And the point we're trying to make is to just be intentional about the communication and the programming so that we don't have a conflict, because you're right, there will be vulnerable residents, living there, and we want to make sure their needs are met. And so I think what we're asking for, at least what I'm asking for, is something just more intentional and deliberate, acknowledging that you have kids, teens, and seniors in very close proximity to each other. And I think just ignoring that, or it's just by hoping that passive design avoids any conflict, just doesn't seem to make sense to me. So what we're asking for is just some more intentional program that acknowledges and communicates, not just by I would hope that the school would be acknowledging this as well, right? But the school isn't in front of us today. I think the point is to be intentional with the programming, the communication. So it's not just one of many activities, but this just, it's SRG is the expert here. We're not, but we're just flagging a potential social dynamic here that I think could be challenging if it's not intentionally dealt with. So, we don't need to debate too much, but I do, strongly encourage the Planning Commission to recommend to City Council that City Council, continue this issue along with the environmental issues that Mr. Stevens acknowledged, because I do see it as a potential for conflict, if not dealt with.
That was really helpful. I think I understand a little bit better. What we do for the TDM package is we designate an employee who is the TDM representative. We can absolutely designate an employee of the building to be the school's representative, so that there's someone who has it as part of their job description, to engage with the school and to be a point of contact between conflict between the residents and the school. So that would, I hope, address maybe probably not everything, but be kind of towards what you're looking for. And that is, we can absolutely do that. That's easy. Because it's, we can mandate one of our employees. It's the service, it's the creation of programming that I find difficult to kind of commit to, but I don't know if that would help address your concern.
Bill, if I could add a thought, and you're much closer to the direct discussions with SRG, so you can maybe build on this a little bit. But I think one of the strengths of that group and the reason they were selected as the operator for this building is that they are experts and they are very good at tailoring programming and opportunities that are appropriate in the context of their communities. They have several dozen across the United States, and not all are the same. So, I think they are quite adept at coming up with things that work and make sense in the context of their facilities and work in the context of the neighborhoods that they're situated in. Bill, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but that's, an impression that I've had in learning more about them and working with them.
That's right, but I think the important thing is it's in the context of the communities and in the context of the resident, desires, and that's where, after hearing more, where I went to was focusing how we react to this issue around what I know is in our control, which is the scope of work for our employees, where we can commit and be sure of that commitment now, around how they work. And then that lets us have the social programming element of the building evolve over time. And from there, we'll have a paid employee that's, part of their job is to make sure that it involves the school as the programming is put into place. So.
Okay. Yeah, I think I don't want to wade too much into the middle of this, but I think we also, just for the commission, we have to be somewhat cognizant of what the role is here for us in a site plan, and how much of some of these issues that are being raised, which are important issues, are perhaps a little bit beyond the scope of a site plan approval, at least to some degree, but there are certainly elements that I think are related as far as the design and some of these other issues like TDM. But anyhow, it just seems to me that there may be some things that are perhaps beyond the scope of what a site plan can determine. But it's still certainly worthwhile to bring it up and discuss some of these things. Is there anyone else on the commission that has any further comments or questions? I'm not seeing any little yellow hands. Well, I guess what we can do now, it is a public hearing. I don't know if we have anyone signed up to speak, but I will open it to the public at this time. Mr. Garris, do we have anyone in this meeting from the public wishing to speak on this item?
No, we did not.
Okay. Well, then I will close the public portion of this hearing. And so it brings it back to the commission. I know that staff has prepared, I'm sure everyone has looked at, has prepared a draft motion on this item that includes, I guess, two recommendations specifically to council. And I guess I'd like to make sure that is from staff's or from the commission's perspective, has everyone read those and how do we feel about that? The staff has specifically flagged, and these are some specific items that I guess staff still feels are outstanding. The first one is more specificity on the shared parking. And I know that there's been some of that's being physically provided by the garage that these folks are not building, but staff has flagged that as an issue that they're still looking for some more information on. And then the TDM issue. And I don't know, again, if any commissioners have any thoughts on these items, the way staff has articulated that. Are we in agreement with those? Do we think these need any changes, revisions? Are there other items staff that commissioners would like to add to any potential motion or recommendation to council? So maybe first, let's maybe look at what staff has teed up here. How do folks feel about these issues? And I don't know if the applicant maybe wants to comment. I don't know if we talked a little bit about that, but I don't know. I know Ms. Bazemore flagged that, I think, in her summary, but I don't know if I heard the applicant hit on some of these or respond to that. So maybe that might be better as a starting point here. Has the applicant seen that? And I guess let's start with the shared parking issue that staff has flagged as something that they're still looking for some additional information on. Where are we on that?
So the shared parking. So we provided back a exhibit in a memo that detailed the location of the various spaces and how it stacks in the garage. So essentially, the bottom of the garage is shared space. The middle of the garage, which allows the senior living spaces to connect to the walkway from the second level to our building, is the middle 2 floors, and then the top is reserved spaces for the apartments. So if you drive into the garage, you can pull a ticket that lets you access the shared parking area. You pay, hourly or, your validated rate. And then you have reserved spaces for the seniors and then reserved spaces for the apartments. There would not be an internal gate system that separates the shared from the seniors from the apartment parking. It would all just be based on reserved and non-reserved signage.
Okay. Ms. Bazemore, Mr. Stoddard, I mean, what specifically are the staff looking for beyond some of those details? I know that, again, there's some difficulty here and we have another player involved in the garage, but who's not directly related or part of this, but where are we on that from staff's perspective?
Yeah, we may well have misread the exhibit. I think when we had opened it up, what we had seen is that just like what was described, right, there was shared parking in the base levels, but then there also seemed to be some level of shared parking up at the upper floors as well, and that's why we were flagging this. But maybe we misread it. I don't know if we have that exhibit handy.
I have that up if we want to screen share it. I don't know if I have authorization to do that, but
I
can
think
try.
it throws off our feed if you do.
Okay, I won't do it then.
I'm sorry,
but if you're able to email it to us, we can put it up on the screen. That way we know we're looking at the same document.
Okay, give me a moment. It was attached to our parking narrative, which was part of the resubmission, so that may or may not be posted online. But let me email it to you.
Sure.
Perhaps we could talk about the second bullet point while I'm working on that, but I think that one may be a little easier.
Yeah.
Sure, so the TDM issue, right. So, I mean, staff is asking for a TDM coordinator, and what's the status of that request? What is the applicant's position on that?
We can absolutely provide that. Yeah.
So, no.
Yep. And there's also a site-wide TDM coordinator that's required by the SEE conditions for the whole development. So
right.
We've got some measures within our building to help be supportive of that macro level TDM program. Okay.
So are we waiting for him?
Yes, it's a big file. It might take a moment to go through, but
yeah,
it is coming your way.
I think on the garage and how you read that exhibit, so you spiral up counterclockwise starting from the bottom left. So it's a difficult thing to read, but basically the senior spaces are contiguous, but they start really just before the bridge, and then it spirals into spiraling into the next level. And then there are some other senior spaces where we need oversized spots with clearance. So Paul, we can we can connect it in more detail on it. But in general, I think the big takeaway on how the garage functions is that it's not, the spaces themselves aren't separated out between use and secured between use, but rather designated by signage, and then generally located based on access between the buildings. That was the logic behind how that came together.
Still waiting for the
So,
graphic. Mr. Stoddard.
Yeah, Cameron, it looks like it's attached. It looks like it's attachment, let's see, CGHI 1I, revised parking allocation narrative from 5/20. So I think it's in the PC packet, Cameron, if you're able to click on that link.
Okay. Repeat one more time. Attachment.
Yeah,
letter?
attachment 1I, revised parking allocation.
Got it.
And then the ramp, you'll likely have to zoom in, but the ramps are all near the bottom. There you go.
Let me know which one I should zoom into if you'd like to.
I think if we just go to C7, the 8th floor, this so I can see where the confusion might have come in. So I guess where is the dead end on level 8th floor? Are those red spaces the end of the garage?
Yeah, those three.
Okay.
So you're ramping down. You zoom out now.
Got it. So that number 3 at the bottom left corner is the end of the garage, like the one way of the garage.
Yes, so you spiral down.
Okay.
Spiral down. So.
Got it. And they have okay, so that makes sense. I see how they're collected now. And they have an entryway. So the blue ones, the cyan ones, those are the senior living, and that's because you guys have a ramp or a pedestrian bridge near those spaces.
Yeah, so if you, on the 4th floor, if you can zoom in on that, right?
Is that E4?
Scroll, pan up. Yeah, E4. That's the pedestrian bridge connection. There's a small cluster right around here, along with our collection of handicap spaces. That's because it's contiguous to this, and you have the other spaces. So.
Mm-hmm. All right, so you don't end up with a block of sort of shared spaces that are either isolated from the rest or mixed in amongst the others? The shared spaces are contiguous?
So yeah, if you zoom back out, you're getting, you're spiraling up, and you're getting all the shared spaces on floors 1 through 4.5.
Got it. Yeah, so we can modify the staff recommendation here. It looks like this is addressed. We'll just put that error on staff for misreading the ramping diagrams.
But I mean, it's took a while to figure that one out. So on our side as well. Yeah, and then on the TDM coordinator, we'll make sure that we're happy to have an on-site TDM coordinator.
So, Mr. Stoddard, it sounds like the staff's concerns, it seems to be largely addressed here with this.
Yeah, I think, the parking management seems to be resolved with this latest diagram and sort of the walking through it. And then if there's a commitment, because you all, I think, are scheduled to make a submission 2.0, which would sort of fold in all these intermediate changes. And if that's going to include if that submission 2.0 is going to include a commitment at the site level to a TDM coordinator, then I think staff would, certainly staff would be satisfied with that.
Okay. Well, Well, with that, then I guess I'll again throwing it back to the commission. So, are there other items that the commission would like to see? We're going to make a motion to recommend approval of this. Are there other items that staff would, or the commission would like to include in our recommendation to council on this? Mr. Stevens, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to recommend just a couple minor changes to the to the motion in light of the answers that to the questions that I asked. I can go through those now or whenever you.
Yeah, why don't you do that? 'Cause I think we're getting to that time to start fine tuning the motion here. So.
All right. Well, in the whereas item that has all of the bullets on the significant community benefits, the last one talks about environmental sustainability with LEED Gold. So I would recommend putting after sustainability in parentheses, assuming the residences are all electric. So we'd read environmental sustainability, assuming residences are all electric with LEED Gold for senior housing, etc. So that's the first change. And then the second change is right below that, where it talks about the Planning Commission finds that the proposed project largely satisfies both the primary and the secondary criteria in the zoning code. So I would take out the word both in the second line there. So it satisfies the primary and secondary criteria, and then in parentheses after the word criteria, with the exception of the goal to achieve 20% energy efficiency improvement. So all I'm doing here is just flagging these issues for the council. They can decide to pursue it further or not, depending on their point of view.
Okay. Anyone else have any concerns or recommendations or something they'd like to see in the potential motion? A bunch of hands just popped up. Look at that. I don't know who was first. So I'll just go with Ms. Weiss. She's on the screen.
Okay. I will follow Mr. Stevens' lead on the going all electric. Although, you know, I might suggest that we just make that an explicit recommendation. So maybe I will suggest that. You know, that under now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of, with the following guidance, that maybe underneath that we add a bullet, the applicant commit to, you know, provide fully electrifying the building. And, you know, I mean, what I heard, Mr. Stevens, is at this stage, they're not able to commit to the 20% improvement, but, you know, I think we could ask for it. So I don't know. What do you think?
I'm okay either way. They did say that, you know, that's the direction that they're going in. So I kind of, you know, gave some deference to that sentiment, but I'm certainly okay to put it in as a definite recommendation to council.
Okay. Okay. So then I would suggest we add a bullet that says the applicant commit to fully electrifying the building and committing to 20% improvement in energy performance as indicated in the secondary criteria. Okay. And then I would also add a bullet under the recommendation section that the applicant provide a commitment to intentionally market and program, to intentionally provide marketing and programming to the residents with respect to the, you know, building connection with the nearby school campus. And okay. Since the applicant mentioned it, we could just say, you know, including, you know, a staff person designated as a liaison to the high school.
Okay. Mr. Hira, did you want to contribute?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would just back what Ms. Weiss just said about improving or having programming to improve the social integration between the residents of the senior building and the students at the middle and high school. But I also I just kind of want to, before we vote, I just want to say that I do feel that it's in our purview to make recommendations and ask for programming for developments that are happening that mirror sort of our small area plan and our ideas. And I would say that, you know, I have done this with other developers when I was doing work in Alexandria and on the planning commission. And, you know, when we did mixed income housing and we had very low income people in close proximity to upper income people, we knew there was going to be some conflict. And so we know we've got a whopping age disparity here. We can foresee that there may be some tension, conflict, and we're just trying to put in proactive planning to make it viable and a conflict-free zone that everyone feels inclusive and comfortable. So I think that's well within our rights as planners and as planning commissioners. But I also would say that it is clear that the applicant did not take us seriously. There was very little look, and we have basically repeated exactly what we said last meeting. And so I have a feeling that whatever we recommend is going to be exactly what we recommended last time we met with this applicant. And they will do exactly what they did to us this meeting to the city council and really have nothing to add. So because of that and the importance, I think, of social integration, and that we will have other buildings that are residential and mixed use that come before us in this development site. And so we should set a precedent. And I think the precedent is that if we have recommendations during a work plan and you come back to us during the actual vote with very little work being done, that you get delayed. And my vote is going to be no on this. And it's not because I don't think this will be a great building for our community. It will. But I think, you know, we need to stand strong. And when we ask for things and there's no thought behind or rationale even given, that we have to, you know, say, okay, well, you didn't take us seriously, so you can't get a vote of approval on this. So I'm sure you all don't agree with that, and I'm sure, you know, many of you will vote to pass this, but I just want everyone to know why I will be voting no when we do the roll call.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hira. I appreciate your thoughts and your explanation, and that's what this process is all about. Everyone is coming at this with they're bringing something to bear, and again, I don't think the issue, just from my own perspective, I don't think the issues that were raised were not important or entirely beyond our purview. I think the implementation of it, you know, begins to be a little bit difficult from where we sit, but not something that, you know, is shouldn't be discussed here. And certainly any issue we bring up, whether the applicant sort of agrees with it or not, I think I agree that, you know, when we don't see a lot of revisions, it just kind of, again, accentuates some of the feeling that we get on certain cases where, you know, the commission as a whole is not viewed as something that needs to be paid too much attention. It's just kind of a roadblock on the way to final approval. And I don't think any of this applicant thinks that, but I think that there are times where it's based on how things get resubmitted or don't get resubmitted or revised. I understand the sentiment, and I've felt that myself on other particular issues. Anyhow, are there any other commissioners that have anything else that they'd like to see in a motion? Assuming we get a motion, and assuming that motion gets the requisite votes, are there any other things that didn't already mention that other commissioners would like to see? And if not, then I would at this time ask that if there's a commissioner that feels they are ready to make a motion on this item, make a recommendation to council that if there's no other further discussion about the form of that motion, at least at this point, I would look for someone to make a motion on this to move the item.
Chair Krasner, I was frankly trying to get the Word document up on the page because I couldn't edit the PDF directly, so I wasn't able to capture the first two comments that were said. So if you want a full read back, I may need a repeat, or you can, if you can go off verbally what
I
was
took
said.
some notes, and we'll try to, whoever makes the motion, we will try to help that person
Okay.
with reconstructing the comments. I was writing down some notes when Ms. Weiss was speaking, in addition to Mr. Stevens. So hopefully we have captured that, but we'll help you, Mr. Karras, to make sure that we get it written down.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
In a form that we can record properly. So, okay. So again, at this time, I guess I'll look for a motion on this item. Is there anyone ready to do that? Okay. I'm not seeing any little yellow hands go up. So we need a motion. We need to do something with this. We need 4 votes to do something with it. So let's see what we have. Mr. Stevens, your hand has gone up.
Yeah,
motion?
I'm sorry.
Are you ready to make a motion, or do you have a comment?
Yeah, no, I'm okay with going ahead and utilizing the suggested motion here. When we get to the end of it, though, I think that's where I went along with Commissioner Weiss's proposal to take the 2 things that I had suggested as parentheses up above that and just make them recommendations at the end there. So I may ask her for her help on that. And then on the other items that we've been discussing about the social interaction also, I don't know if where we wound up with that is just to make a recommendation at the end. And if so, I would ask for input from Mr. Hyra on that. So with that, kind of setting it up that way, is that all right? If we do that, and I can go ahead and
sure. Yeah, that sounds fine. Why don't you go ahead then, and we will assist you as needed.
Okay. Whereas a complete application for a special exception site plan, SESP, for Block D1 of the West Falls Economic Development Project to allow a mixed-use building, senior housing and retail, up to a maximum height of 15 stories was submitted by TC Mid-Atlantic Development 5, LLC, the applicant, pursuant to Section 48-486C in conformance with the procedures set forth in Section 48-488B of the City Code. And whereas at its regular meeting on April 25th, 2022, the City Council formally referred the special exception site plan application to the Planning Commission for its review and recommendation. And whereas the Planning Commission finds that the proposed project is generally consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and substantially achieves the goals of the Special Revitalization District for Education and Economic Development. And whereas the SESP application is generally consistent with the special exception entitlement approved on July 8th, 2019, and the subsequent special exception entitlement amendment approved on August 9th, 2021. And whereas the Planning Commission finds that the proposed project provides significant community benefits, including but not limited to the following: mix of unit types to prepare for aging in place, indoor and outdoor amenity spaces for the building residents, appropriate mix of uses, ground floor storefront retail, various community benefits, including affordable housing, cash in lieu, planned streetscape improvements surrounding the D1 building, multimodal access within and adjacent sites, and environmental sustainability of legal senior housing and group and bioretention facilities. Whereas the Planning Commission finds that the proposed project largely satisfies both the primary and secondary criteria in the zoning code for consideration of special exception applications, including conformance, comprehensive plan, and small area plan, new commercial space with a mix of commercial and residential uses and other community benefits. And now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of PR 22-17 to City Council with the following guidance. And here I will pause to say, did we need to make modifications to any of these 3 bullets?
Well, I think and the commission can discuss this, but it sounded like the issue about the shared parking from staff's perspective, and staff is the one who, of course, drafted this bullet. Sounds like they're now satisfied with it, so we could leave it in. It sounds like the applicant has, in fact, provided that. So unless a commissioner or we as a commission feel that it needs to continue to be looked at, it sounds like staff is no longer as flagging this as a missing piece of information. So we might be able to delete both of these items, or at least the first one. Maybe the second one stays there as to keep the applicant on notice that they need to do that. But at least the first bullet, we may be able to delete that. Was that kind of the consensus that everyone else heard? Yeah. So, okay. So that, I mean, I see some nodding heads. Okay. So why don't we, I think, Mr. Stevens, you could, as part of your motion, say we're going to delete the first bullet related to the more information on how shared parking will work. I think we'll keep the second one because we still think that should happen. And then as far as the other items, I know that, okay, so we mentioned committing to all electric, the building be all electric, and then the 20%, meeting the full primary and secondary criteria, including the 20% energy performance. Was that those? And then those are the two that I think you mentioned as far as environmental issues. And then there's the third issue as far as the kind of the programming issue.
Energy efficiency performance.
I'm sorry?
I was just modifying the word.
Yeah, you could probably word those better than me. So I mean, if you want to go ahead then and kind of try to word the all electric and the energy issue as part of that, then we can try to figure out the third one.
Right. Well, I think that's sufficient to communicate the issue to the account.
Well, so just for Mr. Garris's benefit. So, these are, so if you could word that in how you'd like it worded as far as the guidance to council on those points. Mr. Stevens, if you could, as part of your motion.
Right. Did we need to address that third bullet?
Well, we do. I mean, I was going to, well, it depends for Mr. Garris's benefit. It might be better to do it one by one so he can get the verbiage down. And so let's see if we can figure out the first two, and then we'll look at that last one.
All right. Well, I can go ahead and read the first two bullets. Yeah. The applicant commit to designating a transportation demand management coordinator for the building who will provide information to residents, visitors, and employees of the senior housing and retail spaces. Applicant commitment to all electric and 20% energy efficiency improvement.
Okay. And then that brings us to, so then the third item, and actually we should, for proper form here, maybe we should get a second, on that, at least on that part, and then we can talk about that third one. So do we have a second on the motion as read so far?
And
I'm sorry, and was that Ms.
Coleman? Yes.
Okay, Commissioner Coleman seconds. So now discussion, and again, I think there's discussion that was raised previously on the issue of, and then I think it was Ms. Weiss. So Ms. Weiss, do you, if you would like to see an additional recommendation on the point about programming with the school, how would you like to see that? If you still like to include that, how would you like to see that worded?
As follows. The applicant commit to intentional marketing and deliberate programming that acknowledges the close proximity to the secondary campus including a staff liaison to the secondary campus.
Okay, so Mr. Garris, did you get that? Looks like you're typing in real time. So first of all, does the maker of the motion, so that we'll call that a friendly, would you say that's a friendly amendment, Ms. Weiss?
I think it's friendly.
Okay, good. And so does the maker of the motion, Mr. Stevens, do you accept that amendment to your motion?
I think I did just a quick question. The term intentional marketing, I apologize, I'm not familiar with that. Is that something that's kind of well known to people that deal with this issue and will know what that means? Or does that require any elaboration?
I can say what I mean by it, and I'm not a marketing expert, so I don't know, if it is a thing in the marketing world. What I'm looking for is sort of what I don't want is for somebody to accidentally stumble into this development and not know that there's a secondary campus nearby. It's just to be, that somehow in the marketing as well as the programming, there's an acknowledgement that one of the benefits of this place is the close proximity to the schools.
Okay, well, I presume if council has any questions on it, they can come back and listen to the recording here to get better clarification and understanding as to what that means. So the answer is yes to your question.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
So you accept, so Mr. Stevens, you accept that amendment. There's the seconder, Commissioner Coman, do you accept that amendment?
Yes.
Okay. So any further discussion on, yep.
Yes, there's just a typo in front of programming in that third bullet. Could you make it deliberate instead of delivered?
My screen is small. You got good eyes, Ms. Weiss. I'm working on a little laptop here. I could barely see that. Okay. All right. So, okay. Any other discussion on the motion? So we have the motion as amended, and it's been seconded to recommend approval with the guidance as has just been discussed. Any additional discussion? Hearing none. We'll get a roll call vote. Mr. Garris. Was there discussion?
This is Derek. I just
oh, go ahead.
On the third bullet, it's the applicant commit to instead of to commit to. Just delete the first two. The applicant commit to. Take out that first one. Yeah, and then add the second one. There you go. Yeah, I mean, I like the spirit of the third bullet. Deliberate program that acknowledges the close proximity. I mean, what we're trying to get here is just a working relationship, right, between the building and the school. And we are looking for the applicant / developer to signal to their management company, and not just signal, they would demand that the management company has a staff member that has as their duties to interact with the school so that there can be some programming, and we can't really say what that programming is, but what we would like is a relationship formed so that we have some relationships built between the staffing of the senior building and the staffing of the school, and then together they will work on programming that hopefully can get some of the senior residents and the kids working together on mentoring, so that there is this social integration between the two populations. So I know I've said a lot. It's just a bullet point. I think the bullet point gets at that. But what I'm trying to do is give the applicant some tangible action items that hopefully they would have thought about prior to coming into this meeting, but there are things that can be done with staffing, resources, and also signaling to their management company. I mean, the management company is going to do what they think they should be doing to provide the best quality service for their tenants to maximize the profits they may not be thinking about social integration, but we are, as a planning commission, we should, as city staff, and it is then our job to get the developer who has the most ability to get their management company to do what is necessary to get the building approved. And I would just say that I felt that the applicant really just didn't take seriously the recommendations we had. I like that we are putting in something in our recommendations for the city council to consider as they think about doing a final approval for this. But I think it really is important to get developers think about spreadsheets. They think about profit margins. They do not think about social integration, but planners do. And it's our job as the planning commission to get our applicants and our developers to think more broadly than they usually do. And I think in this instance, we've tried to communicate that, but for whatever reason, it just wasn't heard and listened to. So, but maybe council will have a little more sway with the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Hira, for your comments and your explanation for where you're coming from. Okay, any other discussion? If not, then Mr. Garris, roll call vote.
Mr. Krasner,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Teets,
Yes.
Mr. Pointes,
Yes.
Ms. Weiss,
Yes.
Ms. Comat,
Yes.
Mr. Hira,
No.
Okay, that's 6-1, and the motion to recommend approval as described passes. So thanks, everybody. Thanks to the applicant team, and good luck at City Council. Okay, we'll move along to 6B, and then after that, actually, I'm gonna recommend we take like a 3 or 5 minute recess just for a, I don't know, refreshment break, potty break, before we dive into the work sessions, because there may be a bit of a discussion there. I do recognize the hour, but I think a few minutes might be needed to stretch our legs. But before we do that, let's quickly do item 6B, which is adoption of our minutes from the May 4th, 2022 meeting. Does anyone have any comments, edits, or such on those minutes? They are relatively straightforward. It wasn't, I guess, a short meeting, but the minutes are short. So, any comments? Let's see. I'm looking for yellow hands. Don't see any yellow hands. Okay, if not, then we'll need a motion to adopt our minutes as prepared. Go ahead, Mr. Stevens. You're muted. If you're trying to talk.
Try it again. I move that we adopt the minutes as
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? If not, then roll call vote.
Chair Krasner,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yeah.
Ms. Teets,
Yes.
Mr. Pointes,
Yes.
Ms. Weiss,
Yes.
Ms. Comat,
Yes.
Mr. Hira.
Yes.
Okay. The minutes are adopted. Okay, as I just said, why don't we take a 5-minute recess, and then we will reconvene in 5 minutes at 9:30 to dive into the work session. Okay, Planning Commission, if I had a gavel, I'd hit it. We're officially in recess for 5 minutes. right? Looking to see if everyone's still logged on again. I got a cookie. Hope everyone else got some sustenance. It's one of the benefits that's one of the benefits, I guess, to the at-home meetings. Unless Paul's going to start bringing us cookies.
Did you bring enough for everybody?
Next week or next meeting, I'll have to.
I'm sure we've got a machine with a CD drive. I can maybe it'll come through on that.
Okay, well, I think we have everyone back, or most of us back. I'm looking.
3D printed cookies. I'm sure they'd be delicious. I assume that's how I shouldn't name a specific brand. I assume those are how those are made now.
Okay, let's see. I think we have a critical mass back. So we'll call us back into session, call the meeting back into order here. And we'll pick up where we left off, which is item number 7, which is our work session. We have 2 work sessions tonight. I think the first one will be shorter. At least I hope it will be. So the first work session is on, I guess, Planning Commission. I guess we provide comment on this, Paul, because it's city-owned land or leased land.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
So yes, just So the West, just for everyone's benefit who's watching, the West Falls Church, Virginia Tech Graduate Center site purchase and agreement. So why don't you explain to us, Paul, what this is all about?
Sure. So thank you, Chair Krasner. Thank you, members of the commission. Happy to present the slides tonight. This is intended as a briefing for you all. This is tentatively scheduled for you all to take. The item that's going to be before you is a land transfer, and I'll speak to it in the director's report when we look at the look ahead. Maybe I'll mention in the director's report that it's tentatively on your schedule for your next meeting, June 15th. And so I wanted to use some time tonight to brief you on the background of this. So there is a deal that's been reached amongst 3 parties: Virginia Tech, the City of Falls Church, and then Rushmark, on a development of the Virginia Tech properties. On this map, they're labeled as Parcel 1 and Parcel 2, and I'll get into the details of the development agreement later. But really, these slides are intended to focus on the commission's role, and that is that the commission has to weigh in and make a recommendation to the council on any proposed land transfer, either land acquisition or land sale. I'll get into it as I go through the slides. So there are 2 parcels involved. Sorry, I've got the slides up on 2 screens, although it doesn't matter which one I point to, you can't see my pen. But Parcel 1 there is highlighted in red. That's the existing Virginia Tech graduate building as well as the surface parking lot. And that is owned by Virginia Tech. That's, owned by the city and leased to Virginia Tech. It's approximately 5 1/3 acres. And then Parcel 2, which is not highlighted, but it's the parcel on the corner of the Metro Access Street and Haycock Road. And that is owned outright by Virginia Tech, and that's just under 2 1/4 acres, 2.18, for a total site area of approximately 7.51 acres. So that's the existing land. For context, there aren't a lot of labels here. So for context, that's Haycock Road running along the off the page to the right. It's Route 7 running along the lower section of the screen. That diagonal footprint building that takes up most of the picture is the old George Mason High School. You can see Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School extending off the page to the left. And then, of course, the WMATA, that's WMATA surface parking garage, bus loop, and then the WMATA West Falls Church Station is just off picture to the upper side of this image. If we go to the next slide. So some of this dates back to a 1995 ground lease that was entered into between the city and then 2 Virginia universities, UVA and Virginia Tech. Under the terms of that lease, City of Falls Church is still the landlord, with the universities being the lessees. Virginia Tech did buy out UVA's interest in 2018, so now the agreement is solely with Virginia Tech. The lease began in 1995, and the expiration of the lease was in 2035. But what we'll get into in the next slide, if we jump to that, is that there was a buyout option. If we can go to the next page. Nope. Cameron, I don't know if you're able to advance, but it's not advancing on. Oh, there it is. So under the terms of the lease, there was an option for Virginia Tech and UVA to purchase the land that they were leasing. The option to purchase began in 2021, and there was an agreed upon purchase price of about $3.35 million. Now, that purchase option came with a restriction that the use would only be used for education or government uses. If there was a sale to a third party or a change in the uses, then there was an adjustment in the sales price, and there would be a fixed sales price back to the city of 33% of the adjusted value. So I think a lot of times people have said, well, gosh, there was a bad option that the city put in there for the universities to purchase, but there was a protection that ran back to the city, and that is that if the use of the land ever changed, then the city would see the benefit of the adjusted property value. So if we go back, I'm sorry, not back, if we keep going forward, go forward to the next slide. And then this will get into the terms of the deal itself, among the dollars of the deal. So there would be two sets of transfers. So first, the city would transfer the site to the city, and then the city would sell the site to Rushmark at a price point that's already been agreed upon. That's $25 million. And when that sale is made, that 33% rule would kick in. So 1/3 of that $25 million would accrue to the city, $8.4 million, and then the remaining 2/3 would accrue to Virginia Tech. And just for historical reference, when Virginia Tech bought out UVA's interest, they paid $8 million. So essentially everyone is made whole by this deal, that Virginia Tech gets the money they paid to UVA back, and then everyone ends up making about $8 million out of this. The city a little bit more, and Virginia Tech a little more as well. But that's the summary of the dollars and cents of it. And then if we go to the next page, I think is where it gets to the development program. So this is the program that Rushmark has put forward for redevelopment of the site. So in place of the Graduate Center, HIT would develop a new corporate headquarters. And as part of that, they would have a National Center for Smart Construction, approximately 40,000 square feet of lab space. And then there would also be approximately 400 market rate apartments on the property as well. And I think, is that the end of the slides? Oh, no, I'm sorry, it goes on. So if we keep going. So this is the footprint. So you've got the city's economic development site, you've got the city's high school, middle school, and then the economic development site at the corner of 7th and Haycock, traveling north from that along West Falls Station Boulevard. You would have the Virginia Tech site. And the design of that site was made such that the Smart Street could continue up into the metro property. So you'd have the HIT headquarters on one side and the apartments on the other. And then West Falls Station Boulevard would continue into what's already been the approved development for the WMATA site of the apartments and townhouses there as well. And so this ultimately does get to that vision of a coordinated development centered on or linking to the West Falls Church Metro Station. And then I think there's one more. Here we go. So next steps. And this is why we're briefing you all tonight. So the purchase and sale agreements are being drafted. The term sheets have largely been agreed to. City Council has a role in first referring those purchase and sale agreements to the commission. You all would be asked to make your formal recommendation, as I said, at your next meeting. The closing would happen after the closing on the land would happen after the zoning process is completed, and that's typical for a land transfer. You wouldn't buy a piece of land until the zoning was in place. But it notes that even as that deal is being worked out and the zoning is being evaluated, the construction of the West Falls Station Boulevard, that would be under design and construction would commence. So that is the end of the slides. I know this is coming to you for the first time, so I'm happy to field any questions I can tonight.
It wasn't obvious from the beginning, Mr. Stoddard, this is land that's outside of the city. So if that wasn't obvious for everybody, I think most people on the commission know that. But for anyone watching who doesn't know that, what we're talking about here is that lot. Once you move beyond our redevelopment site, you're in the county. So any benefit as far as tax revenue or anything like that might occur from it going from a publicly owned piece of land to a privately owned piece of land is going to accrue to Fairfax County, not to us, at least not directly, other than through the sale. So in that sense, Paul, I understand that, again, just to set up our role in this. I know, yes, we typically do comment on the sale of any or disposition of any city property. I don't know how much property the city owns outside our borders other than this lot. Maybe there's something else we have, like on Gordon Road or something, but I don't even know if we do over there. So is this to your knowledge, is this the only piece of real property that the city of Falls Church owns out? Oh, well, I guess the schools, right? Other than Mount Daniel Elementary. Is there anything else outside of the city limits that we own other than this?
Yeah, prior to the water sale agreement, certainly the school campuses were outside the city, but the jurisdiction line was adjusted. But you're right, Virginia Tech remained outside the city boundary. And then I think portions of the city's property yard used to be outside the city boundary, but that was also adjusted with the water sale agreement. So now the property yard is also fully inside the city's jurisdiction.
So it would just be Mount Daniel and this, essentially. Be the only piece of land we own outside the city.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Go ahead, Ms. Gilmore.
Paul, I'm just curious, do you know, in the rendering, if you go up one, Cameron, do you know which building is which is going to be the HIT campus and which is going to be the apartments? They're right next to the stadium and the schools, so I'm just curious about that.
Oh, interesting. I don't have that answer off the top of my head, but we can have that answer
They
when you take
may
action.
not be decided yet, but yeah, I would be good to know what's going to immediately adjacent to the secondary campus.
Yep.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Hira.
Well, it seems like in this, obviously we're going to make a recommendation, but what's the $8 million going to be used for? Has the city decided on what those funds? Because it seems we're not able to ask for affordable housing or anything, right? Because this is outside. This is going to be Fairfax. But what we do have is $8 million that the city will be acquiring, and I'm wondering, do we as a commission want to make recommendations on how that money is spent? Whether it's for affordable housing or whether it's to improve this small area plan and this part of the city. I mean, this is brand new for the city, right? With all of this development that is happening on this side, and the slide, Paul, that you have up now shows what an extraordinary amount of things that will be going on there. I would think that the city would want to maybe utilize that $8 million in a strategic way in this part of the city. And obviously there's a lot of different uses for those funds that could be, recommended, but do we have an idea? One, does the council already have ideas for how they want to spend it? And then two, how much leverage do we have as a commission to make recommendations on how that money is spent? Is this really just something that comes before us and we just rubber stamp, or is this something, if we said no to, we actually could have leverage with the council in dictating or strongly recommending how the $8 million that we are earning is spent?
I think if you're asking about sort of the Planning Commission's authorities, I think that the Planning Commission's role in land transfers, I think, is really guided by whether the transfer is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Brian, to your point, this is outside the city's jurisdiction, but I think you could still look for guidance in the city's small area plans and comp plans for the adjacent areas talking about this as joint development. So, certainly I think that the use of the land is consistent with what the city's been contemplating. In terms of the use of the funds, you all do have an avenue through certainly through the CIP to make some recommendations that way. But I think specific to this item, it would be fair to engage in that conversation with the council about sort of, what are some things that could be done with the proceeds of the sale.
And I think the other, I think Mr. Howard, actually, I think Mr. Howard's points are very on target. I'm sure we're not party to that on the planning commission here, but I'm sure there are others on council who have been discussing this, and I would hope that there's been some discussion about where the proceeds from the sale would go. But I think there's a fundamental question, from me, about, they're not making any more land. It's a very valuable piece of real estate. I know that Virginia Tech has a long-term lease, but not that much longer, until 2035. That's only another 13 years from now. And then the question would be, are we giving up anything in the future by selling now? Might we ever have a need for something on that site? Otherwise, is there some other benefit? There's the opportunity to purchase any other land of this magnitude will probably never happen again. So before we sell something, it's kind of like a once in a lifetime, type of sale. That'll never happen. There'll never be an opportunity to recoup, any more land. So I hope folks have thought about very carefully about this being the wisest option. So I would hope that the price is the best price we could get, and it's going to go to something very worthwhile. So to Mr. Hira's point, I think we certainly can provide that input. I think part of our role is, when it's within the city boundaries, we're looking at the comp plan, we're looking at the use of that land, and does it make sense from a comp plan perspective. I think outside our boundaries, I think we have to look at what we're getting in exchange, and in this case, if it's money, I think it's very fair to talk about where our views on that, as far as whether or not we feel it's a good deal for the city to sell it. So that's my 2 cents. Mr. Well, your hands was up next.
Just one thing to comment on there on the sale of land under the lease terms, right? If there isn't a transfer to a third party, then the university could purchase it at the agreed upon price, which was a little less than $3.5 million. So, right, they could buy the land at $3.5 million, but then it's not clear whether there would be any sort of redevelopment of the campus. Whereas, right, obviously the benefit of this is you put a national headquarters and an innovation for smart construction right on the city's doorstep. So I think there is opportunity for economic benefits that spill over onto the city line.
What is the National Center for Smart Construction? I was not familiar with that.
Yeah, that's part of the HIT proposal, is that 40,000 square feet of their space would be dedicated to a lab for developing smart construction technologies and techniques.
As long as HIT is located there. I don't know. They're private.
Well, yeah, they
can change their mind at any time. So we shouldn't get too hung up on. That sounds interesting. I don't know. I guess we need to know more about what that is. It sounds fancy and nice. But before, we could be sure that it's a good deal. I don't know what the National Center for Smart. I don't know what smart construction is. I know what dumb construction is, but someone will tell me about what smart construction is. So anyhow, and I'm not being silly. I'm just trying to say that I think that it's worth talking about and getting more information. Again, maybe there are wiser minds in City Hall than us who have really thought about this, and this is the deal that's been struck. But if it's kind of come before us, I guess we're allowed to chime in. So I think we should do our due diligence and provide our honest appraisal of what we feel the city should do, or whether or not this is the right move, and if so, right, where should the funds go? I'll shut up. Miss Weiss, I think your hand was up next.
Yeah, just sort of to underline that, I think when this comes back to us, I'd like to know what the real alternatives are. and what the business case is or the justification is for the $8 million. And when we get to the alternatives, does the current lease mean that Virginia Tech can just call the land in at will, or do we have to agree to that? So like a true options analysis, what else is there and why $8 million? But my other question goes back to Andrea's comment about the location of the building. We have this beautiful new school that was developed, I think, with the expectation that something would be happening on the Virginia Tech site, but maybe not right up in front of the building the way it's designed. So I guess my question is, would we have any ability to put some stipulations or conditions on where development happens? Like, could we guarantee some sort of additional buffer between the high school and any building that goes on that site?
That's definitely a conversation I can, or a question I can raise, and I think we can be better prepared to respond to it next time.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Stevens, go. You were next.
Yeah, picking up on that comment, we certainly want to be aware, or I'm sure the school would want to be aware, since they're in the process of hopefully soon installing a solar system on the roof, that all of a sudden they're not going to find a big swath of it in the shade. So that may be something to pay attention to and be part of the discussions with Virginia Tech on. Beyond that, I would think off the top of my head, the thing that would be important, or one of the key things that would be important, is how this site, the Virginia Tech site development, could affect the West Falls project. And along with that, I would think that the path towards the best and quickest development of that Virginia Tech site is probably going to work to the best advantage of the West Falls site. So if the Virginia Tech team, which does involve some of the same players that are involved with the West Falls team, are lined up and ready to move ahead and so forth, then I would think that would give at least some impetus to our wanting to approve the sale. The last point I have is that if you look at the 8.4 million and 5.33 acres, I think that's roughly $1.5 million per acre. And I was just curious, Paul, how does that compare to, or is there a way to compare with the value that the city received on a per acre basis for the 10-acre site of the cities? Just as a benchmark, so we know that, 8.4 million sounds like a good number, but is there a way to give it some context?
We could compare it to the 10-acre site. I think what I might suggest is maybe looking at other land sales, because the city's in a long-term, is in a ground lease, and then of course part of the value is in the development program itself. So what I might suggest is maybe we can probably look at numbers for recent land sales for some of the other developments where they would have been outright purchases. And it would have been more of a sort of a market rate sale. We can look at those numbers and get those back to you.
Yeah, I think it's just, give us some level of comfort that that's a good number.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There are no other comments. I know we have other things to get to, so we could probably continue to riff on this for a while, but I think we've said our piece. Let's move on to the next work session, which is on the T-zones. I won't read the long title, but it's on the proposed text amendments, which would revise various aspects of the transitional zones, the T1 and T2 zoning districts, as they're currently, some changes to the way they're currently enacted in the ordinance. So without further ado, why doesn't Mr. Stoddard give us a concise overview of where this is at? And I know this has been kind of in the works for many years, and it seems to have been resuscitated from after being on life support maybe for a long time, or maybe even partly dead. It's back. So how does Mr. Stoddard get us all caught up, since we haven't heard too much about it until today?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, members of the commission. I'm going to walk through sort of two staff reports. I'm going to use this one first, the one that's already up on the screen. This, of course, is the report to you all. But then the more lengthy staff report is the one that was in front of council what is it? Not this Monday, but the Monday before. And that was the referral staff report. So request for tonight is for Planning Commission to hold a work session and provide feedback on the proposed text amendment. And also I'd welcome any feedback, not written down, but obviously I'd welcome any feedback on the timing of the item as well and the public engagement process that's tentatively mapped out. Let's see. Oh, there it is. I did write it down. Staff would like feedback on the proposed public engagement schedule. And you'll see it when we get to the timing section, but as drafted, the Planning Commission plays a pretty central role in being sort of the facilitator of the community conversation. So the proposed time, and I'm going to jump into the background section next because that relies entirely on the attached staff report, but just to talk to timing. So the first work session with this item was held with council in June of last year, 2021. So we're coming up on the 1 year mark of this work. And it's been through kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 work sessions with council. And they ultimately made a positive first reading and referral out at their May 23rd meeting. They did refer it out to the Planning Commission. It's a code requirement for any zoning amendment to go before the Planning Commission. They also referred it out to the Environmental Sustainability Council as well as the Housing Commission. And I've already been coordinating with the liaisons for those groups to provide a briefing at the staffing level and to get it scheduled with their groups. So June 1st, that's tonight. That's your first work session on this item. And then what we've tentatively mapped out, what staff is proposing is that Planning Commission would hold what's called a public listening session. So the idea is that you all would have a work session with it tonight to get familiar with the proposal, and then you'd have an opportunity to hear from the general public. And of course, in advance of that, the staff intention is to put yard signs up on all the T-zoned properties. We would do that later this week so that people would have approximately a week and a half to be informed about the upcoming public listening session. And of course, that's not the last opportunity for the public to comment, but the idea is to dedicate a large volume of time on the Planning Commission's agenda to receiving public comment. And then hold a similar exercise, but with boards and commissions on July 20th, which would be your second meeting in July. Hold another Planning Commission work session on August 3rd. The idea is that you all would now be informed not only of you having time to think it through, but also the opportunities to hear from the public, other boards and commissions, and then to make your formal recommendations back to council on August 17th. And then it would go back to council in September and October is the tentative schedule that's been mapped out. But with that, let me jump into the content of the proposal. Cameron, if you're able to pull up, yes. All right. So Cameron, I'll try to guide this by using the line numbers. And just so everyone knows, this is the staff report that was used before council. So this is the latest material, and it's the materials that were referred out. So let me start with line 9. So this is a summary of the proposed changes to the T-zones. Number 1 is consolidating the 2 T-zone districts. Today, there are 2 T-zones, T1 and T2. Under this proposal, they would be consolidated into a single T district. Second recommendation on line 13 is to remove single-family housing as a by right use in the transitional zone. And I'll speak to sort of the why of these sort of as I go, I guess. So, removing single family, the intent of transitional zones is that they provide a transition between the more intense uses in generally the commercial districts and then the lower intense uses in the single family districts. And so if you put single family in the transitional zone, then you haven't actually transitioned from one to the other. Let's see, commercial uses, line 16, there's a recommended expansion of the allowable commercial uses, and this was for 2 purposes. One is to open up the number of neighborhood serving uses that would be available in the T-zones. And then 2 is a recognition that when you're removing single family as a by right use, you need to make sure that there is you can't lock a land you can't lock a district out of all reasonable by right uses. So as part of removing one by right use, we're also suggesting adding others. Let's see, line 21, townhouse and multifamily. So obviously this has been, a big topic of conversation. So I'm actually going to start on line 26 and then work my way back. So on line 26, where it talks about removal of existing site areas. So in the T zones today, it's possible to develop townhouses, but in order to do it, you have to have 3 acres of land. And so it's really sort of not possible under the T zones today to really accommodate or to accumulate 3 acres of land. It's very difficult to do. So the idea is to provide townhouses on smaller sites, less than 1 acre. Now there is this condition of it being not fronting on North Washington that was struck by council. So it would be T zones of 1 acre or less anywhere throughout the city. And then as part of that, that would be allowable as a conditional use. And as part of that conditional use, it would have to include at least 10% of the units as committed affordable or workforce housing. Building heights would be the allowable building heights would be increased from what they are today to an allowable maximum height of 4 stories or 50 feet. Today, for commercial uses in the T zones, you can go up to 45 feet, and so it is an increase in height of approximately 5 feet. But the bigger change in the building form would be in the allowable lot coverage and the setbacks. And it's easier to see in the marked up code in terms of what it is today versus what's proposed. But what's proposed is to get up to an 80% lot coverage. But I will note that there's no limit on impervious coverage today. It's only a lot coverage max on the building. And then a reduction in building footprints, building setbacks, which I can get through when we get to the diagrams. Let's see, notable changes. That's picking up on the back and forth of the council conversation. So let me keep jumping through in the staff report. Let's go to background on line 55. So what's driving all these proposals? So back in February of 2021 is when council adopted amendments to the primary and secondary criteria of the special exception code. And as part of that motion making those changes, council provided direction to staff to develop zoning tools that would facilitate infill development of smaller lots and all residential projects. And so staff identified the T zones as a good candidate for accommodating that. One, because they're intended to serve as a transition from higher intensity to lower intensity uses. And also because the T zones have just shown themselves to be difficult to develop under what we've seen in recent applications, whether they're approved or denied. Usually when someone has a piece of T-zoned property, they come in with a request to rezone to the B uses so that they can get access to the special exception code and thereby do mixed use development. That's what happened on the back of Founders Row 2, which was recently approved, where there was that T-zone property along Ellison and they needed a rezoning in order to do the multifamily on the back of the project. If memory serves, I think something similar happened with Founders. Founders 1, they had to rezone, I think, from R1A to B in order to do mixed use along Park Avenue. And so T-zone is showing itself to be a zone that's not really accommodating of development, and so people are trying to rezone out of it in order to access other zoning tools. And then just sort of as evidence of that, right, there's been limited development activity in the T zones over the last 20 years, where in comparison, certainly there's been development in the commercial areas, but also the single family areas have seen a significant volume of teardowns and redevelopments as well. And so it's really those spaces in between that haven't been sort of open to change. T1 and T2 zoning, let's see, as I mentioned, these were intended to provide some sort of transitional zone between more intense and less intense uses. There is a map here. So this is the existing property that's still zoned either T1 or T2. Although I did notice in prepping for the meeting, we left a piece of property off of here. The Kaiser building is currently zone T2, although we didn't highlight it. But what's shown is what's highlighted in purple are all the pieces of property that are still zone T1 or T2 in the city today. And then the acreages that are noted are the acreages of contiguous parcels that are zone T. So parcels that aren't separated by non-T parcels or by street edges. So you can see a couple large assemblages. Well, they're not assemblages because they're under different ownership, but sort of large contiguous blocks of parcels along North Washington, and then smaller pieces of contiguous parcels along Park Avenue. Let's see, in terms of the allowable uses on line 84, T1 and T2 both permit public buildings, churches, schools, daycare facilities, professional offices, group homes, residential institutions, parking lots, mixed-use developments. Interestingly enough, they also allow mixed-use development by right under the MER code. Unfortunately, no one's been able to use the MER code. So there is a by right option for mixed use today, but no one's been able to use it. And then the conditional uses in both districts are the same. And then the only difference is that T1 allows the by right use of single family and duplexes, where T2 does not. Line 93. So this is a rundown of, let's see, building height and yard requirements vary by T1 and T2 by land use. So you can see, if we just jump down, I guess, to the last two lines where T1 all other uses and T2 all uses. So this is the largest building you can put up in either of these districts. It's either 3 stories or 45 feet, an allowable building coverage of 40 feet, although we note again there is no impervious limit. And then the yard setbacks, 15 feet in the front, 10 feet on the side, and then 40 feet in the rear. There's a graphic if we go to the next page. And credit for this one should go to Cameron. Cameron, thank you for doing this on short notice. This is a build-out analysis of what you could do in the T districts today versus what you could do under the proposal. So the upper half of the graphic is showing a maximum build-out of a building, and we, to provide a reasonable comparison, we had to put the building somewhere on the site. So we pulled the building as far up to the street edge and then pushed it as far to one side as we could, and then built to the maximum lot coverage. And so you can see where there are yard requirements, but then we actually sort of, you end up with larger yards than is otherwise required because you run into the building, the lot coverage requirement. And then there's no requirement, obviously, that the rest of the T-zone be developed as parking, but we did want to sort of point this out just as a staff note that generally what happens in the T-zones is you end up with a relatively modest building, but then it's surface parked, and so the rest of the lot, although there are often trees dotted throughout the parking lot or at the edges of the property, you do largely end up with a large surface parking lot surrounding a smaller building. If we go to where do we want to go next? Review process. So this was a question that came up. How would an SE vary from an SU? How would a special exception vary from a special use permit? So this is something I didn't get into earlier, but part of the proposal is to steer these applications for multifamily into a special use permit process instead of a special exception process. And both of them would ultimately be approved by council, but the intent of the special use permit is to drive it to maybe a more directed community conversation. So if we're able to get, I don't know if we're able to fit the whole schedule on the screen. That could be a trick of, yeah, that'll do it. So the special exception process, what staff has mapped out, and we've shared this with the Planning Commission before, including the preliminary board and commission workshop, various walking tours for the public, a full round of formal review by boards and commissions. The fastest that process can go is about 11 months. It often takes longer, but certainly 11 months I think is the fastest we would be able to get through the various steps. The special use permit, what we've proposed is an 8-month process, though I will note that there were some members on council who asked, is there a way to do it in 6? And so I think that staff will be looking at that as well. Is there another route that this could be done? Not that would shortcut any of the conversation, but maybe have some of the conversations simultaneously versus sort of one at a time. But the idea under a special use permit, you'd still start the conversation with council. We would still try to get to that preliminary workshop with the Planning Commission and the AAB. Council would still make a formal referral out, but they would make it not a formal referral to all boards and commissions, but to select boards and commissions. And what we had listed here was the Planning Commission and the AAB, and then it would come back to council for their final consideration. Fiscal impact. The fiscal impact for the zoning change itself, we don't typically run those on a zoning change, but we would continue to run a fiscal impact analysis on any proposed project. And then I get to the timing of the report, which of course I've been through before. Well, and actually it's modified. We had to extend the schedule a little bit from what we shared with council due to staff availability. So you'll see a couple of the dates are pushed out a session. There is a lengthy set of code changes, but maybe what I'll do in the interest of time is sort of stop here, because the next section of the report is, I don't know, 8 or 12 pages of marked up code. And so I'm happy to stop here and take questions or sort of keep going. I'll take some direction from the chair on that one.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Stoddard. Yeah, for a district that makes up a pretty small fraction of the city's land area, there's a fair bit to discuss here. I mean, it's small in area, but it plays an important role in kind of the overall scheme and development plan, for the city. So I don't know where we want to start. I mean, there are a lot of parts of this that I think are, that we need to chew on. I guess I'll open it up to, I have some of my own ideas, but I think I'll let other folks go first if there are other commissioners that want to jump in. Ms. Teets, I see your hand has just gone up. Go for it.
Thank you. I guess I have a couple questions. One, so we're talking about, the 10% affordable housing. I'd rather see that at 12. We've always wished for 12%, although we never get anywhere close to that. But the other question I have is, how are we going to define that? Are we defining that at 100% of AMI or 80% or 60%? Because we're saying workforce or affordable, so workforce could be 120% AMI. So I think it needs to be defined what we mean by affordable housing. I guess the other thing is that, I looked at your diagram and you had that little step down, but I don't think they don't, under these regulations, they don't have to do that step down. The whole building could be a big rectangle, correct?
So in the proposal, there is a requirement for a step down. I think it's 10 feet back.
Okay.
Whenever you're either adjacent to an R district or across the street from an R district.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I went through the code, but it's like hard to find everything. I know. Yes. And then the other thing is, I am concerned about the 80% lot coverage, and I recognize that we want to give the maximum amount of land, but what are we doing about water on these properties? Typically, if it's commercial, we expect them to care for all their water on that property. Are we going to expect that here as well?
Yeah, so they'd still be held to the standards of the stormwater requirements in terms of how they manage their stormwater. So they'd still be held to those standards.
Okay, and then on parking, I think most of us are a fan of less parking. I personally walk around the city and see so much empty parking now. We just don't share it well. But so what are the parking? Are we going to have? And I looked for that too, and I didn't find it. So are we going to change the parking regulations specifically for these projects? How that your diagram? I'm not sure if there is any parking, or maybe it's a deck within that building.
Yeah, so there's no. So as part of this, there aren't any proposed changes to the parking requirements. The council did raise the question of whether the multifamily parking should be revisited, given the right, given the community interest in sort of driving down the parking numbers. Staff didn't draft anything as part of this proposal, and so the status quo would remain, which is people would still need to, by right, they would have to meet the parking requirements in the code that are formula based on the number of bedrooms in each unit, but they'd still have the option to come in with a TDM plan to get a reduction in the parking requirements.
Yeah, I just think it's going to be difficult, even with the TDM, to not end up with a good amount of surface parking. I don't know if you remember, Bob Young came in with a proposal for the property that now has a Salvadorian restaurant, but it used to be Smash Burgers, and it has like a sushi place, that little space there that has the nice flower stuff. Anyway, he came in for a proposal for that, and he just didn't have room for the parking, even with a reduction of parking. And that's a fairly big lot compared to some of these others in a way. So I think we're really, if we don't revisit parking, I'm not sure that how viable some of these changes will be. So I think it's something that we have to really think about. But maybe they'll, and I mean, typically a TDM takes time. You have to have an engineer study your traffic, study the whole thing, and put together a proposal. So I don't know. So I'm just something to think about. The parking has to be dealt with. I think those were my big things. But number one, though, is if we're going to let people build something bigger for affordable housing, we must define it in some sort of way. And if we're saying affordable or workforce, that's two different types of income levels. So I think we really are going to have to decide what we really want. And maybe if it's workforce, it's 12%, and if it's affordable, it's 10, or if it's workforce, it's 15%, and affordable is 10, or something like that, and come up with some numbers to frame it. That's all I have right now.
Okay. See anybody else? Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, I do have some questions. First of all, was I correct in understanding this, that two-family buildings are eliminated?
Yeah. So today, well, yeah. So what's being eliminated is the by right allowance for either a single-family home or a duplex. So it's by right, but it would come with lot minimum. So today, if you had a piece of T1 land that was 10,000 square feet, you could build a duplex on it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I get the eliminating the single family. I think the explanation that you provided, makes sense. But if one of the things that council had on their mind in pursuing this issue was the so-called missing middle housing, you would think that duplexes would be something that could be desirable. So I'll simply raise that as a possibility at this point. The lot coverage to 80%, was that something council wanted? Because that's kind of a new thing, right? As far as our code goes.
It's something that came out of the work sessions with council. There was it certainly it wasn't unanimous, but I think my read of the conversation was that that's where they wanted to see the conversation start. I think there's still some research that needs to be done by staff to assess whether that 80% is really needed in order to make some of these projects work, or whether is it enough, or could a smaller percentage also work?
Yeah, just at first glance, it just strikes me that that's a pretty large percentage, and for the property to continue to function as a transition, you would think that something a little less than that might be appropriate. But I'm still learning as I think about this issue. I'm just curious.
Some of that, I'll just throw out that some of that is sort of a function of the lot size and the setback requirement. So it is difficult when you're on a smaller site, because if it's not perfect right angles, you end up with sort of lost space, or you're trying to meet a setback requirement on this side, and so it pushes you over here. So developing on small sites is not easy, but like I said, there's still some research that staff should be doing to sort of test that number.
Okay, so I think it's good people realize that's still a somewhat fluid issue, subject to further modification. Just curious, we're kind of looking at the role of these T properties as a transition between commercial and residential. But I assume there's quite a few properties in the city, residential properties that back up to B zones without a transition zone, as a buffer. Is that correct?
There is, and this isn't the only one, but one that commonly springs to mind for me is along the sort of south side of Broad Street, where there is no Park Ave on the south side of Broad Street, and so there often are B uses or B zones and R zones butting up against each other. The future land use map provides some guidance there and actually identifies some of those as sort of deserving of being transitional areas, but currently they're not zoned that way. And of course there are other areas throughout the city. That you can look at the zoning map, and you actually, if we just go down 2 pages in the staff report, Cameron.
Yeah, I mean, out my back window, I look out onto a lawn.
Right. I mean, if we stay on that map, yep. I mean, you can see that the T zones aren't forming sort of this sort of, complete buffer between the two zones. They're it's not consistently applied throughout the city now.
Yeah. Well, I just point out that there's other areas that probably could benefit from some kind of thinking on what we want transition zones to do. It's not limited to just the historic T zones. Let's see. What else do I have here? Oh, would projects being considered for a T zone, what would their obligations be as far as things like undergrounding utilities, installing sidewalks, capital contributions to the city, and so forth?
So there is a required considerations. Let's see, Cameron, as soon as I can find it in the code, I'm going to ask you to jump to it. The short of it is that when you're dealing with a smaller project, the package of voluntary concessions that comes with that is not going to be as large. That a smaller project just doesn't have the feasibility to carry those costs. So you likely are not going to get utility undergrounding. One, because it's a smaller project, and two, because it's not as efficient to underground a small number of poles. The required considerations. There we go. Cameron, if you're able to go to line 326 in the staff report. Oh, we lost the staff report. Oh, and now it's back.
Yeah, I see there's some catch-all phrases there.
Yeah, enlarging the city tax base, promoting environmental stewardship, and then heightened architecture provide for a harmonious transition. So they would still be expected to, obviously the design of the building itself would need to meet the city's urban design standards, and then the streetscape treatment would need to be consistent with the streetscape standards, except that they likely wouldn't be able to afford the utility undergrounding.
So as part of a special use permit application, the way this is worded would allow for some discussion depending on the nature of the site as to whether or not there are things that the developer should be obligated to do.
Yeah, it's a special use permit. Typically, there would be conditions attached to the issuance of a special use permit, where that would be sort of offsetting the impacts of the proposed development, offsetting the impacts relative to what could be done by right.
Okay, the last thing I'll say is it's just my observation. I mean, it's a pretty complicated area for us mere mortals. So I suppose if you're a zoning attorney, this is kind of no problem here. But I think since this is just now going out of the council sphere of discussion and not only into ours, but presumably into the public's as well, that I look at that schedule and I kind of think there probably needs to be maybe like an information session to the public where somebody who can kind of translate zoning speak into kind of practical speak and kind of help the public to understand. I've gotten a lot of questions from people that, just basic information is lacking. And simply to open this up to just a single listening session, especially in the middle of the summer, I think it could be argued that we should be a little bit more deliberate and to allow for some type of an information session before we get into allowing the public to kind of speak their mind on this. I mean, even though they will, but it might be better if they have kind of a basic level of information that we all work from before we get their comments. So.
I completely agree with you, Mr. Stevens. I'll just chime in on that. And I actually, Paul, Mr. Stoddard and I spoke a little bit, offline, and I think the schedule is completely too aggressive. I don't think the schedule is realistic at all. Just to throw that out there, I think it's way too aggressive. I think, it's again, even though it's a small area of the city, it's kind of complicated. The lots are, they're really different. I mean, it's hard to think of broad brush, kind of scheme, because you have just such a variation of lot sizes and character and adjacent uses. It's somewhat random, honestly. I don't know the exact history. I'd love to know. I think I asked Mr. Stoddard about providing us kind of a history of the T-zones and, have they changed over the years? I mean, have they been mapped since 1948? Because they're kind of, to some degree, they're kind of random, and they, you have some that are fronting on 29 on arterials, and then you have the ones on Park. There's some random, little pockets, like the parking lot of the 24-hour fitness. There's just some random stuff going on. The parking lot behind our favorite Tingaria is like there are 2 T-zone lots there. It's just very random, and I think to try to come up with a consistent scheme. I'm not saying we need to have multiple T districts, but I just think it's an area that's kind of complicated, requires some study, some analysis, which hopefully, because it's a relatively small number of lots, is not going to be a huge lift for staff. I know staff is dealing with their workload issues and trying to just staff this project, but I think that we need to look at it like this sort of scenario. I mean, staff kind of provided a sample of that in the report, but I think we really need to look carefully on like almost lot by lot. I mean, there's so few of these lots, we can almost look at them lot by lot and think about what makes sense. And I don't know. So I just feel like the timeline is a little bit too aggressive. I agree with the issues about the summer. I mean, some of the big picture stuff from ZOAC, I said this to Mr. Stoddard. I mean, ZOAC was, was pushing 15 years old. A lot of the stuff in there, some of it's still relevant, but I think we need to also be just very deliberate and not just accept because ZOAC thought it was a good idea in 2008 or 10 that, we should just accept that. And I agree. I happen to personally agree with the single family deletion thing. But anyhow, I just think we need to look at everything very deliberately and carefully, as well as, the public outreach piece, and see what makes sense. Because honestly, it's just what makes sense on Park may not make sense for some of the lots on North Washington that are larger and again front on a 4-lane arterial, and maybe back up to Parkland and other stuff. I mean, it's very, very different. So anyhow, I just think it's a lot more complicated, and I think it's going to take more time to properly vet it. It's been a long time since the city's updated, any of our districts, in a significant way like this. And I think, it's going to take a proper process to make sure that we do it right, so that we don't have unintended consequences. And with that, I'm just noticing the time. We need a motion, don't we, Paul, to go beyond our witching hour?
You only got 1 minute to make it.
So I guess I'll look for a motion from somebody. I mean, hopefully we don't need to keep on going on too much longer, but I know other folks need to speak. So I don't know. Someone throw out a.
I move we talk for another 20 minutes. Too long?
I'll second that. I think 20 minutes is enough time for us to get through this, at least for now. I'll second that. We need a roll call vote unless there's any other discussion on that. So Mr. Garrett's roll call vote on extending for 20 more minutes.
Mr. Krasner?
Yes.
Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Teets?
Sorry, mouse problem. Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Vice,
Yes.
Ms. Comat,
Yes.
Mr. Hyra.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we got 20 more minutes. All right, I said my bit. I don't know who was next, but I'll just start with who's on top. Ms. Comont, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. It's feeling a little rushed. It would be nice to be able to talk about this a little bit more. One thing that I think would be great, Paul, we did hear some concerns from some neighbors to these sites tonight about drainage issues or stormwater, and my impression of many of these lots is that they actually already have a lot of impervious surface coverage. I was wondering if that was some additional bit of information you all might be able to put together in a map of some kind that shows actually what is the actual impervious surface coverage of these existing lots as they are now. I'm just curious about that personally, and my expectation is that it might already be high. I think our experience with some of the bigger projects that we've worked on is that when new projects are built, the stormwater issues are actually improved because, you know, as discussed earlier, we can add some better stormwater management systems. So I'm glad that that's something that we're looking at for this too. So that was one thing I was hoping you could provide. The other thing that I think would be nice, and I think it was mentioned by one of the speakers tonight, and I think there may already be a council request for this, but is a rendering, you know, sort of the same rendering that Cameron created. Thank you, Cameron, with a building in a B1 zone and maybe a residential building across the street, just so you can get a sense of the scale. My impression of the Broadway in particular is that it might be a bit shorter than what you typically might build in a B1 area. So I don't know exactly what the right height is. I don't know if it's the max or what's typical along Broad Street. I leave that up to you all, but I think it would be helpful to kind of have that sense of how this would fit in between those two different general height limits. I'm also curious about how you got to the less than 1 acre of size. Paul, if you could talk about that a little.
Yeah. So the motivation behind the 1 acre size limitation was a recognition that the city does have a special exception process for the larger developments, and typically when something does come in with a larger acreage, that's when the city can apply the special exception criteria and get to things like significant commercial components, LEED certifications, utility undergrounding, the various basket of voluntary concessions that comes with that. So the reason behind the 1 acre or less was really to facilitate a path for smaller sites that maybe can't afford to go through that larger process. But to not allow that sort of expedited or sort of slimmed down process to be used for a large acreage redevelopment.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I'm just wondering about property owners who might be kind of on the bubble, like 1.2 acres or 1.1 acres. Like, how strict are we going to be with applying that? Because there's really not that much more you can do with an extra 1/10 of an acre, right?
So, well, yeah. So any rule in the zoning ordinance, if it's not one that allows for a variance, is like super strict. So we did. That is the reason why we did this bubble diagram of what are the assemblages of T-zone properties, and there are a couple sites along Park Avenue, but in order to get above 1 acre, it would require more than 2 property owners going in on a project. And I think, and so, you know, we could move that line. That's what this process is all about, is sort of figuring out what are the right limits. But that's why the 1 acre was sort of a starting point. And then we could look at these specific assemblages and figure out whether, yes, that should go through this sort of special use permit process, or no, that really is deserving of a special exception.
Okay, so these assemblages, like the 1.9 acres, for example, at Park and Virginia, I think. I think those are existing townhomes and maybe single-family homes. And my
Right.
pediatrician,
Right.
those are all separate property owners. Okay, so you're just showing it as like this is a group of T-zoned properties, but they all have individual owners. So in that 1.6 acres next to it, those are also individual owners, most likely. So any one of them individually could go through this special use permit process, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'd like a little more discussion about the acreage size. I don't have any sense of what's right, but it just seems like that should be something we should think a lot about. And I agree with the sentiment that bigger projects should go through the bigger process. Definitely. Sorry, I'm almost done. I guess the only other thing I want to mention, and I don't know if this is the time to do this, but I scrolled through like 7 pages of code about drive-through uses in our T-zones. Can we just agree that we don't want any? I mean, if we're opening it up, like, can we just say we don't want any new drive-throughs in our T-zones?
So
throwing that out there.
Well, so that's not drive-throughs in the T-zone. So it's so that code ended up in there because it's already there. So there's so the way it's constructed, that section, what is it, 48867, which begins on line 304, is additional regulations for special use permits wherever they happen to appear in the zoning ordinance, that if there are special use permits for particular uses, regardless of their district, then they all get driven into this section. And all of that drive-through code already existed. The reason it's all highlighted in the staff proposal is because we did do some cleanup. There's some special use permits that are approved by the BZA and some that are approved by the council. And they were intermingled within that section. So the one thing that we did suggest is, without trying to actually change the way drive-throughs are governed, we did at least split those things into 2 baskets. So the part 1 that begins on line 306 is specific to council-approved SUPs, and then the part 2, which begins on line 603, is specific to BZA-approved SUPs.
Okay. All right.
So it seems like it was a very contentious piece of code when it got written, and so
it's thorough.
It's not one I would volunteer to wade into.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all for me.
I will throw out that in the age of COVID, also drive-throughs have had a resurgence in terms of people being able to get service and feel safe doing it. So I think there were drive-through libraries. So
how about bike throughs? We could do some bike throughs, maybe. That would be
I
fun.
have had trouble trying to use a bank drive-through on a bike because the window height is not appropriate.
Yeah,
It's very awkward, and you don't trip the sensor. It's a big mess.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see, who was next? Ms. Weiss?
Yeah, I had the same reaction. There's a lot of real estate dedicated to drive-throughs, and I didn't really understand why. So I guess I had some questions about the sort of formulation of the townhouse language, which is not right in front of us right now. And I seem to, line 318. And maybe this is me reading it too closely and not closely enough all at the same time. But I guess just for further conversation, what is the difference between the language in 318 to 324 and the language further up that says, is that just the further up that says that there can be townhomes, apartments, and condos in the T-district? Is that where we're just very clearly delineating special exception versus special use or conditional special use permit? I was confused. City council may approve. It just seems fuzzy to me, and I didn't fully understand it. So I'll just, what can they approve where, and may approve? Is that just giving them permission that they don't otherwise have? I wanted to understand that better, and I'm not articulating it well. And then I guess the other comment I had is this an opportunity for us to be a little bit more specific about, around A, B, and C underneath the townhomes, right? To look for stormwater improvement or to look for energy improvement, which is meaningful, especially for affordable housing to reduce energy costs. And can we define a little bit better what harmonious means? So if there is a building in a B1 zone that's actually smaller than the height maximum allowed in T1, is there a way to add in the T1 building needs to be X percent smaller than the adjacent B1 building? I mean, they're just a way to sort of be a little bit more specific about what we want. And I'll contradict myself now by just saying I had a question about that with, Ms. Teets said that, would we be more specific about what we mean by affordable? My reaction to that is what our needs might change over time. So maybe there's some sort of performance improvement that we can have there. So rather than specifying X percent AMI, maybe we can say like a percent improvement in some sort of index, or, I don't know. I'm not being specific because it's too late and I'm rambling, but getting too rigid there might not help us adjust to our needs over time, but I do appreciate wanting to see something more specific there. It's bedtime. I'm going to shut up now.
So on the construction question, so a zoning ordinance stipulates what is allowable. So if something's not written there, then you can't do it. And so what this is saying that council's giving themselves the authority to approve projects that include 10% of the units as committed affordable. So the way this is constructed, if the project proposal does not include that 10% affordable, then council cannot approve it.
But what is approved in the line if you scroll up above?
Yep.
Page up.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate page break.
Yeah. It just says may approve conditions on such uses, townhouses, apartments, and condominiums in the T district.
Right, and then jumping down, it says yes, they can do all these things, but they're all subject to the following restrictions.
Okay. So that's a clear minimum of 10% unaffordable.
Yeah. Correct.
All right, that's helpful.
Mm-hmm. And then on your question of the others about where we can be prescriptive and where we can't, some of this gets to what you can and can't do with a zoning ordinance. So the reason the city's able to get, for example, on the larger developments where a VC comes in to do better than the code mandated stormwater improvements is because it's voluntary, right? You can't. It's voluntary. You can't mandate it. And so I think some of this is drafted with sort of that in mind, but we'll keep sort of looking at that as staff to figure out, where the city has the authority to require a little bit more versus where you have to wait for it to be volunteered.
Okay, I think Mr. Puentes, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is great discussion. And I'm glad we're having this conversation. I think that the strongest case for doing this is that the zones aren't working now. And I think, Mr. Starr, you went through it, kind of mentioned that a little bit, but I think that's the strongest case for why this is needed. And I really appreciated the map after page or line 81. It was very illustrative about kind of where these are and all that. But what jumped out at me, my question is about these, is there a relationship with the MER zones? This is probably not something that we want to bring up here, but I was struck by looking at those, as the chairman says, the smallness of the T properties, but then the largeness of the MER stuff. And is there any relationship there, especially with that one up by the East Falls Metro?
There's So there's Myrrh. Sorry, when you started asking the question, I jumped to my larger zoning map. So there are areas where the Myrrh overlay is already instantiated, right? So the Myrrh is an overlay that floats on top of other zoning districts that gives you access to it, but doesn't limit you. But there are pockets of Myrrh along North Washington, sort of everything north of East Columbia, and within the POA is under the Myrrh. Everything in the Gordon Road Triangle is under the Myrrh. There's a little pocket at the corner of Park and Oak that's under Myrrh. There's also a pocket of Myrrh along South Maple that includes Virginia Village. So there are pockets of it, but it's and it generally doesn't overlap with the T zones.
Got it. Okay. So there's no relationship, and just with the larger point about the T zones, I mean, Myrrh, maybe folks disagree. I don't know if the Myrrh is working the way I think it was intended either. So if there was an opportunity to address that here, but it sounds like they're separate and distinct things. So
yeah, I feel like the Myrrh is a good story of what you don't want to do with a zoning ordinance. Obviously, there was a very good community conversation about what people wanted to see happen as part of sort of development of sites. But it ended up with so many requirements and so little potential for development that it's not worth it for anyone to actually do it.
And that's kind of where I was going with all this. So it's, as we have this conversation then about the T zones, the lessons from the Myrrh might be good for guidance as we go forward. We can over engineer this, I think, quite a bit if we try. So thanks.
Okay, Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, just one final additional comment, I should say, rather than final. One of the reasons why I think the T-zones haven't worked, that the council is kind of focused on in some of their discussions, is the situation where we take these smaller properties and we impose on them the same kind of commercial, retail, office obligations that we typically look to the large, 4-acre type projects. And that just doesn't pencil out. So I would hope that that we can give some consideration to well-designed residential buildings that don't have commercial space in them. It just really doesn't seem to work in small spaces, and particularly today where so many people work out of the home, that office space is very difficult to justify. And so anyway, I just put that thought out that this may be a place where we can look at good, financially viable, well-designed residential that doesn't necessarily have commercial and retail space in it if it's not something that the marketplace wants at that location.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Okay, we're running out of our extension time now, which was 10:50. So I think I'd be okay with another 10 or 12 minutes to take us to 11, and I think maybe we'll have to just skip over. Well, maybe Paul can give us a break.
I move we extend our meeting until 11 p.m.
Get a second on that from anybody?
Should have just done that in the first place. Sorry.
Second by Mr. Puentes. Any discussion? I guess a roll call vote, please, Mr. Garris.
Mr. Krasner?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Teets?
Yes.
Mr. Puentes?
Yes.
Ms. Weiss?
Yes.
Ms. Comot?
Yes.
Mr. Hyra?
Yes.
All right. There's some very reluctant yeses there. So, Mr. Stoddard, I think, obviously we could talk about this for another hour if we had enough coffee and, other caffeinated beverages. So I think we're not going to do that tonight. So I think all this is to say that there's a lot to discuss here. I think there's a lot of, it's a big topic. So I think we're going to, like I said at the beginning, we're going to take a really hard look at the schedule. I'm already looking at the next time you have this listed on June 15th, and then what's coming up on June 15th. I think June 15th is way over scheduled at the moment. There's 10 things on there, not literally, but there's 6-7 things on there that, all of which may have a fair bit of discussion and plus speaker series. And so I think that, like, I don't know if we have time for a public listening session if you were looking to do that and all the other things on that day. I just think when you and I can talk offline about schedule, but I want to make sure that, again, we chart out a path forward for the T-Zone project that provides adequate time for both for the actual public meetings themselves, but also for staff to do the work in between, so that you can come back with, the type of responses and research and answers to some of the things that we've raised. And I want to make sure that you have adequate time, you and your folks have adequate time for that. So we can talk about that. But I think, overall, I mean, you could see that I think all of us are interested in this topic, and I think that I think that's one thing. The one thing I heard from everybody was some agreement that yes, the T-zones, they haven't been working, and maybe as they were intended years ago when they were implemented, and I think it's been something that's been kicking around for over a decade, and probably even longer than that. That there needs to be something done to help encourage the kind of development we want to see on those lots. But I think that's the key, is figuring out what we do want to see without over regulating. I'm sensitive to some of those comments that I heard from folks too. If the zoning ordinance is too prescriptive and too strict, and again, it can become difficult and become counterproductive. So that's something that we'll need to continue to chew on this. But so, Mr. Stoddard, I mean, at this point, how are you envisioning this public listening session working on the 15th? Just with all the other things that we have listed, we have like several action items, speaker series. Is that realistic that we could do that all in 3 hours?
It's going to be tough. And one thing I did want to flag under my director's report is that I got late word this afternoon that we actually need to add something to your agenda on June 15th, and that is a planning commission recommendation on a land transfer from the city to the EDA of 208 South Gibson, one of the quadplexes in Virginia Village, that the council needs to move that over to the EDA's ownership so that it can enter into a partnership for maintenance of those properties. So that also has to come before you. So apologize for not having that.
All right, well, that's just one more thing. So I just don't see, honestly, like I don't know. I don't know if I think maybe I think it may be pushing. You and I can talk offline, but I think I'm sort of feeling that that's the direction we need to go as far as schedule, and then looking at building from that, pushing things maybe deeper into the fall for any type of final recommendation from us, as opposed to August. I just don't think that's gonna work. But you and I can continue to talk about that and bring it back to the commission for further input. But that would seem to be, I think, the direction we need to go. So real quickly then, Paul, in the final 7 minutes here, I think very quick. I may ask my fellow commissioners, unless there's something, a burning thing that people need to share, that they table commissioner reports until the next meeting, unless there's something like really, really important. And then I'll ask Mr. Stoddard just to use the remaining time to just, again, summarize his director's report. The correspondence items, I think most of them were letters from neighbors on T-zone stuff that most of those folks spoke. Mr. Thompson spoke, and I believe the other gentleman spoke. And so the other things in there, I think people can read. So, Mr. Stoddard, why don't you close this out with your director's report?
Sure. So unfortunately it's a little late in the night for this one, but I did want to share. I don't know if anyone wants to hear inspiring things on urban design. The APA, American Planning Association, regularly publishes their planning advisory service, where they look in depth at a range of topics that all fall under the city planning umbrella. And PAS report 600 was on planning for heat resilience, and I thought that was a well done report. I thought it talked about a lot of things that were probably some good lessons that we could be carried over into the city of Falls Church. They talked about things that I thought, things that other places are doing that probably Falls Church could be thinking about as well. Things like when you design a building, are you designing the faces of the building such that they're self-shading with things like, are the balconies on the upper floors, are there louvers on the upper floors that are self-shading the building, on the hottest times of the year? Where are the window exposures? Are those generally where you're picking up the summer sun so that you're picking up a lot of heat, or are they done on other sides of the building? There were also requirements in some communities to get to a minimum shade percentage on sidewalks. And I thought that was a really well-made point. It certainly has a lot of purpose in Arizona, but I think it would mean, just as much, on days like today here in Virginia. So anyway, I thought that was a good read. You can go through it word by word, or you can skim it and get the good points. I thought it was a good one, so I wanted to share with you all. Also, the 2022 park scores are out. This organization rates parks throughout the park systems throughout the country, and it assesses them on a range of measures, but the measures are fairly equal in that just having sort of lots of low density development with lots of baseball fields doesn't mean you'll get the best park scores. In fact, the highest scores this year, as they usually do, went to DC, Arlington, Minneapolis. So there are a couple cities that tend to be in the highest ranks, and they're holding their rank. And I think it was worth noting that the city actually did pretty well. When you think about access to parks, it's 99% of city residents, at least distance-wise, are within a 10-minute walk. We could probably get some more sidewalks and crosswalks along those routes, but at least distance-wise, the city has a very good starting point. I did want to, because I promised I would start doing this, Cameron, if we're able to pull up the attached agenda, and I can flag some things that are in the look ahead. So one thing I promised the commission we would start doing as staff, and we've already taken a good stab at it, is we're going to get back into that habit of filling in that, let's see, 1, 2, 3, third column of things that are floating around on the council's agenda that will be relevant to the commission. We're going to start populating that so that you all aren't caught off guard by anything going forward. And I apologize that happened. So looking ahead, so let's see, June 15th is scheduled to be your first, your return to in-person meetings. So that would be back in in the council chambers. So that's there. We'll have a speaker series. We're going to have, we had worked with a Virginia Tech student class that they took a look at what could be done at updating the city's land use, and it's titled Land Use and Economic Development chapter of the comprehensive plan. Also, you all will have that action for Wawa. That was pending staff availability, and it's not. So we're going to use the fallback date. But just to give you a heads up on that, city staff has received a variance application for a Wawa at the corner of Broad and Little Falls. This is the site of the no longer active Stratford Motor Lodge. The variance application was actually suggested by staff. It's a variance application for setback requirements. So on most of Broad and on almost all of Broad and Washington Street, setbacks are measured from the face of the curb, but that clarification isn't in there for the OD district, so it's measured from the property line. So if they were to follow the letter of the code, their building would actually be set back, I think, something like 40 feet from the street edge. And in terms of trying to promote a walkable, vibrant city, having a building 40 feet back from the street doesn't get you there. And so what staff suggested is that they come in and ask for a variance that their front setback requirement be calculated from the curb edge, just like it is for every other property along Broad Street. So that'll be before you. And then if depending on how the variance is handled by the BZA, they'll come in with a site plan application after that. And so they would come in with a site plan application, either utilizing or not utilizing the variance if it's approved. Let's see, action. This is the thing I briefed you all on tonight. These are the land transfers between Virginia Tech and HIT. You will have a work session on Founders Road 2, so they have come in with their site plan. We've completed staff review of that, and so we would host a work session on June 15th. And then we'll need to look into the scheduling of this. We had tentatively thought about having a work session on the East End Small Area Plan, but we may need to punt that back. So it's getting busy.
It's getting real busy on that day. Yeah, June 15th. It's exciting that we're back there, but I don't think we want to be there till 3 a.m. So we'll have to measure that out. But all right, the final. I think we're just about to hit 11 here. I'll just say, I do like Wawa Hoagies, being from New Jersey and the home of Wawa. But that's going to be an interesting project. I look forward to looking at that. All right. Well, it's 11 o'clock. It's the witching hour. I appreciate everyone for sticking this out for a long meeting. I think it was a good conversation on all these points, and I'm really looking forward to getting back to in-person meetings. I know we won't be able to, I guess, run up and get a cookie like I just did today, but maybe we'll work on getting some other refreshments or something. I don't know. But I do look forward to seeing everybody back in City Hall. I think it'll be interesting and exciting to be back in person. And yeah, so everyone have a good evening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. I'll call this meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.